thought her past was buried forever. But when a forgotten name echoes through a snow-covered village, everything changes. What secret was powerful enough to erase her identity? And why is the world finally ready to remember her now? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The winter winds howled across the moorlands of northern England, carrying with them the bitter chill that had settled over the realm for weeks. Snow blanketed the rolling hills in thick, unforgiving layers, transforming the landscape into an endless expanse of white that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky above was a tapestry of gray clouds, heavy and oppressive, blocking out what little warmth the sun might have offered during these short winter days. It was the kind of cold that seeped into bones and lingered there, the kind that made even the hardiest of men seek shelter by roaring fires. In a small village nestled between two steep hillsides, smoke rose from countless chimneys, the only sign of life in an otherwise frozen world. The village of Ravenmoor was unremarkable in many ways, a collection of modest stone cottages with thatched roofs, a simple church with a wooden bell tower, and a marketplace that came alive only on certain days of the week. The people here were farmers, blacksmiths, weavers, and merchants of humble means. They lived simple lives, governed by the changing seasons and the whims of the noble lord, whose castle stood on the distant horizon, a dark silhouette against the winter sky. Among these simple folk lived a young woman known to all as Anne Miller. She was 23 years of age, with striking features that seemed almost out of place in such a modest setting. Her hair was the color of burnished copper, falling in thick waves past her shoulders, though she often kept it braided and hidden beneath a wool hood to ward off the cold. Her eyes were a deep emerald green, bright and intelligent, framed by long lashes that cast shadows on her high cheekbones when she looked down. Her skin, despite the harsh winters and long hours of work, remained fair and smooth, with only the slightest touch of rose in her cheeks from the cold air. Anne lived in a small cottage at the edge of the village, a dwelling she shared with her elderly guardian, a woman named Ida, who had taken her in years ago. The cottage was humble but well kept, with walls of gray stone and a roof that Ida's late husband had repaired many times before his passing. Inside, the main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large hearth that Anne kept burning throughout the winter months. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls as Anne moved about her morning tasks. She wore a dress of deep burgundy wool, simple in cut but well made, with long sleeves that covered her arms completely, and a skirt that fell to her ankles. Over this, she had wrapped a shawl of thick gray wool, pinned at her shoulder with a simple bronze brooch. The dress was cinched at her waist with a leather belt, from which hung a small pouch containing herbs and a few coins. Her feet were protected by sturdy leather boots, lined with fur to keep out the cold. It was practical clothing, suitable for a woman of her station, yet there was something about the way she carried herself that suggested she had not always lived such a simple life. Ida sat in a wooden chair near the fire, her gnarled hands working a spindle with practiced ease. The old woman was well into her 70th year, her face lined with the marks of a long and difficult life. Her hair, once black as a raven's wing, was now pure white and pulled back into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. Despite her age and the stiffness in her joints, her eyes were still sharp and observant, missing nothing that happened around her. "The bread is ready," Anne said softly, pulling a loaf from the stone oven built into the side of the hearth. The smell of fresh-baked bread filled the small cottage, warm and comforting. She set the loaf on the wooden table that dominated the center of the room and began slicing it with a well-worn knife. Ida looked up from her spinning, her eyes studying the younger woman with an expression that was both fond and concerned. "You were awake before dawn again," she observed, her voice rough with age but still strong. "I heard you moving about in the darkness." Anne did not look up from her task, her hand steady as she worked the knife through the crusty bread. "I could not sleep," she admitted quietly. The dreams came again. The old woman's expression softened, and she set aside her spindle with a heavy sigh. "The same dreams? Always the same?" Anne replied, finally meeting Ida's gaze. There was a shadow of old pain in her green eyes, a haunted quality that never quite disappeared no matter how many years passed. "I see the great hall, the tapestries on the walls, the long table laden with silver platters. I hear the music, the laughter, And then I see him, and everything changes to screaming and blood. Ida rose from her chair with some difficulty, her joints protesting the movement, and shuffled across the earthen floor to where Anne stood. She placed a weathered hand on the younger woman's shoulder, her touch gentle despite the roughness of her skin. "It has been 8 years, child," she said softly. 8 long years since you came to me in the night, frightened and alone. You must learn to let go of what was and embrace what is." Anne turned away, moving to the small window that looked out over the snow-covered village. The glass was old and imperfect, causing the view outside to warp and blur slightly, but she could still make out the shapes of cottages and the narrow dirt paths that wound between them. "How can I let go when I do not truly understand what happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have told me pieces, fragments of the truth, but never the whole story. Who was I, Ida? Who was I before I became Anne Miller?" The old woman's face grew troubled, and she returned to her chair by the fire, lowering herself into it with a soft groan. She was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames as if seeking answers there. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of secrets long kept. "There are some truths that are dangerous to speak aloud," she said carefully. "Some names that should not be uttered for fear of who might hear them. I have kept you safe all these years by keeping silent. Why do you press me now?" Anne turned from the window, her green eyes flashing with a mixture of frustration and desperation. "Because I am tired of living as a ghost," she said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. "I am tired of feeling like I do not belong in my own skin, like I am playing a part in a story someone else has written. The dreams are becoming more frequent, more vivid. Last night, I saw a man's face so clearly I could count the scars on his cheek. I heard a name being called, over and over, but I could not make it out completely. It sounded like Kath, or perhaps Kath. I cannot be certain." Ida's face went pale, and she gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You must not," she said urgently, leaning forward. "You must not try to remember. It is too dangerous. There are people, powerful people, who would see you dead if they knew you still lived. I have protected you by keeping you hidden, by giving you a new name and a new life. If you start asking questions, if you start trying to piece together the past, you will draw attention to yourself. And that attention could be fatal." "Fatal for whom?" Anne demanded, crossing the room to kneel beside Ida's chair. She took the old woman's hands in her own, feeling the trembling in those aged fingers. "I know you love me, Ida. I know you have cared for me as if I were your own daughter. But I cannot continue living like this, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering who I truly am. Please, I am begging you. Tell me the truth. All of it." Ida's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, Anne saw genuine fear in that weathered face. "If I tell you," the old woman whispered, "everything will change. You cannot unknow what you will learn. Your life here, simple and safe as it is, will be over. You will be thrust into a world of politics and power, of danger and deceit. Are you truly ready for that?" Anne squeezed Ida's hands gently, her own heart pounding in her chest. "I am ready," she said firmly. "I need to know who I am. I need to understand why I have these dreams, why I feel this constant sense of displacement. Please, Ida, trust me with the truth." The old woman closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down her lined cheek. When she opened them again, they were filled with a deep sadness, but also with resignation. "Very well," she said, her voice trembling, "but you must promise me that you will be careful with what I tell you. You must promise that you will not act rashly or foolishly." "I promise," Anne whispered, her heart racing with anticipation and dread in equal measure. Ida took a deep, shuddering breath and began to speak, her voice low and measured. "Your true name is not Anne Miller. That is the name I gave you when you came to me 8 years ago. Broken and terrified, covered in blood that was not your own. Your true name is Lady Catherine Ashworth, daughter of Lord Edmund Ashworth and Lady Margaret of House Beaumont. You were born in Ashworth Castle, the ancestral seat of one of the most powerful families in northern England. Your father was a trusted advisor to the king himself, a man of great influence and wealth. Anne felt the world tilt around her, and she gripped Ida's hands more tightly to steady herself. Catherine Ashworth, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt both foreign and familiar, like a dress she had worn long ago but had almost forgotten. What happened to them? To my parents? Ida's expression grew even more pained, and she looked away, unable to meet Anne's eyes. There was a conspiracy, she said quietly. A plot to overthrow the king and place another on the throne. Your father was falsely accused of being part of this conspiracy. There was no trial, no chance to defend himself. One night, soldiers came to Ashworth Castle. They were led by Lord Blackwood, a rival of your father's who had long coveted the Ashworth lands and titles. They claimed to have proof of your father's treachery, documents that showed he was planning to assassinate the king. But it was a lie, Anne breathed, her mind racing. It had to be a lie. Of course it was a lie, Ida said bitterly. Lord Blackwood had forged the documents himself, with the help of corrupt officials who stood to gain from your father's downfall. But the king believed the evidence, or perhaps he chose to believe it because it was convenient. Your father was arrested and executed within a week. Your mother? Ida paused, swallowing hard. Your mother took her own life rather than face the shame and dishonor. She threw herself from the highest tower of the castle. Anne felt tears streaming down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. The images from her dreams suddenly made horrible sense. The screaming, the blood, the chaos. She had been there. She had witnessed it all. And what happened to me? She asked, her voice breaking. How did I escape? You had a protector, Ida said, her voice softening slightly. A young knight in your father's service, a man named Sir William Hartley. He had sworn an oath to protect you, and he kept that oath even when it meant defying Lord Blackwood's orders. When the soldiers came, he hid you in the servants' passages of the castle. He fought off 3 men to give you time to escape, and was gravely wounded in the process. But he managed to get you out, to get you to me. I was your mother's old nursemaid, you see. I had retired to this village years before, but your mother had kept in touch with me through letters. Sir William brought you to my door in the dead of night, barely conscious himself from his wounds. He made me promise to keep you safe, to hide you where no one would think to look. And then he left, and I never saw him again. Did he survive? Anne asked desperately, her heart aching for this unknown knight who had risked everything for her. Ida shook her head slowly. I do not know, child. I heard rumors that he was captured and executed for treason, for helping you escape. But I also heard whispers that he had fled to the continent, that he was living as a mercenary somewhere in France or Spain. I have no way of knowing which story is true. Anne released Ida's hands and stood, pacing across the small room as she tried to process everything she had just learned. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, grief, anger, confusion, and a strange sense of relief all mixed together. Lord Blackwood, she said, the name tasting like poison on her tongue. He is the one responsible for all of this. He destroyed my family, stole our lands, our titles. Where is he now? He rules from Ashworth Castle, Ida said quietly. He was granted your father's estates as a reward for his supposed loyalty to the crown. He has been there for 8 years, living in your home, sleeping in your father's bed, sitting in your father's chair. And he has been searching for you, Catherine. He knows that as long as you live, his claim to Ashworth is not entirely secure. If you were to come forward, if you were to challenge him, the king might listen. After all, you are the true heir, the last of the Ashworth line. Your very existence is a threat to everything he has built. Anne stopped pacing and stood very still, her back to Ida. Outside the window, she could see villagers beginning to emerge from their cottages, going about their daily tasks despite the cold. They were simple people, content with their simple lives. For 8 years, she had been one of them, had found a measure of peace in anonymity. But that peace had been built on a foundation of lies and forgotten truths. Could she truly continue living this way, knowing what she now knew? What would you have me do? She asked finally, turning to face Ida. Would you have me hide here forever, living as Anne Miller until I am old and gray? Or should I reclaim what is rightfully mine? Ida's face was a mask of conflict, torn between her desire to keep Anne safe and her understanding that the young woman deserved justice. I would have you live, she said simply. Whether that is as Anne Miller or as Lady Catherine Ashworth, I cannot say. That is a choice only you can make. But know this, if you choose to reveal yourself, if you choose to fight for your birthright, you will be walking into great danger. Lord Blackwood is powerful and ruthless. He will not give up Ashworth without a fight, and he has the resources and influence to make your life very difficult, if not to end it entirely. Anne nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the decision before her. "I need time to think," she said quietly. "Time to consider all that you have told me." "Of course," Ida agreed, relief evident in her voice. "Take all the time you need. But while you think, be cautious. Trust no one with your secret, not even those who seem friendly. In these times, loyalty is a rare commodity, and betrayal can come from the most unexpected quarters." The rest of the day passed in a haze for Anne. She went through the motions of her usual tasks, tending to the cottage, preparing meals, and even venturing into the village to purchase flour and salt from the market. But her mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying the conversation with Ida, examining her newly recovered memories from different angles. The dreams that had haunted her for so long now made perfect sense. They were not merely nightmares, but fragments of actual events, her mind's desperate attempt to hold on to the truth, even as she tried to forget it. As evening approached and the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, Anne found herself walking along the edge of the village, following a narrow path that led up into the hills. The snow crunched beneath her boots, and her breath came out in white puffs that dissipated quickly in the frigid air. She pulled her cloak more tightly around herself, but she barely felt the cold. Her thoughts were too consuming, too overwhelming to allow room for physical discomfort. She climbed to the top of a small rise and stood there, looking out over the landscape. In the distance, perhaps 5 miles away, she could see it, Ashworth Castle. Even from this distance, it was an imposing sight. A massive stone fortress with high walls and 4 corner towers that reached toward the sky. Flags bearing Lord Blackwood's sigil, a black raven on a field of crimson, flew from the battlements. Smoke rose from the many chimneys, and she could just make out the tiny figures of guards walking along the walls. That had been her home once. Those walls had protected her. Those halls had echoed with her laughter. Her father had ruled there with wisdom and justice. Her mother had overseen the household with grace and kindness. And now it was all gone, stolen by a man whose greed and ambition knew no bounds. As Anne stood there, staring at the castle that had once been hers, she felt something shift inside her. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued her for so long began to transform into something else, something harder and more determined. She was Lady Catherine Ashworth, daughter of a noble house, heir to ancient lands and titles. She had been robbed of her birthright. Her family had been destroyed by lies and treachery, and she would not, could not, let that stand. The decision crystallized in Catherine's mind as she stood on that windswept hill, the castle of her ancestors looming in the distance like a dark promise. She would reclaim what was hers, but she would do so carefully, strategically. Rushing headlong into confrontation with Lord Blackwood would be foolish and suicidal. She needed allies, she needed information, and most importantly, she needed to understand the current political landscape before making any move that could not be undone. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the clear winter sky, Catherine made her way back down the hill toward Ravenmoor. The village was settling in for the night, with shutters being closed against the cold and families gathering around their hearths for the evening meal. She returned to Ida's cottage to find the old woman waiting for her, worry etched deeply into her lined face. "I feared you had done something rash," Ida said as Catherine entered, stamping the snow from her boots. "No," Catherine replied, removing her cloak and hanging it on a peg near the door. "I have been thinking, as you suggested, and I have reached a decision." She moved to stand before the fire, warming her hands as she spoke. "I will reclaim my birthright, but I will not do so blindly. I need to know more about Lord Blackwood, about his strengths and weaknesses, about who supports him, and who might be persuaded to support me instead. Can you tell me anything more about him?" Ida settled back into her chair, her expression thoughtful. "I know only what I have heard from travelers and merchants who pass through the village," she said slowly. "Lord Blackwood is a widower. His wife died in childbirth some 5 years ago, along with the child. He has no legitimate heirs, which makes his hold on Ashworth somewhat tenuous. He rules with an iron fist, demanding heavy taxes from the peasants and showing little mercy to those who cannot pay. The people fear him, but I do not think they love him. He keeps a large garrison of soldiers at the castle, men loyal to him through coin rather than honor." "What of the nobility?" Catherine asked, settling onto a wooden stool near Ida's chair. Surely my father had friends among the other lords. Are any of them still alive? Still in positions of power? Some, Ida acknowledged. Lord Pemberton, who holds lands to the south, was a close friend of your father's. He spoke against the accusations at the time, though his words carried little weight against the supposed evidence. He is an old man now, his health failing, but his son, Edmund Pemberton, has inherited his father's sense of justice. There is also Lady Rowena Fairfax, who rules her late husband's estates with wisdom and strength. She was fond of your mother, I believe. They corresponded regularly about matters of household management and charitable works. Catherine committed these names to memory, feeling a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. She was not entirely without potential allies then, but approaching them would require great care. I cannot simply appear before them and declare myself, she mused aloud. 8 years is a long time. I was barely 15 when I disappeared. They would have every reason to doubt my identity, to think me an imposter seeking to exploit old loyalties. You would need proof, Ida agreed. Something that would verify beyond doubt that you are who you claim to be. What proof could I offer? Catherine asked, frustration creeping into her voice. I have no documents, no jewels, nothing that would mark me as Lady Catherine Ashworth. Ida was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. Then, with great effort, she rose from her chair and shuffled across the room to a large wooden chest that sat against the far wall. Catherine watched with growing curiosity as the old woman knelt before it, her joints protesting loudly, and lifted the heavy lid. She rummaged inside for a moment before withdrawing a small leather pouch, which she carried back to Catherine with trembling hands. When Sir William brought you to me that night, Ida said softly, he gave me this. He said it was all he could save from the castle, that you had been clutching it even in your unconscious state. I have kept it hidden all these years, waiting for the day when you might need it. Catherine took the pouch with shaking fingers and loosened the drawstring. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was a ring. She drew it out carefully and held it up to the firelight. It was a beautiful piece, wrought in gold with an intricate design of intertwined vines and leaves. Set in the center was a deep green emerald, the exact shade of her own eyes, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light and sparkled like stars. But it was the inscription on the inner band that made her breath catch in her throat. To Catherine, our beloved daughter, on her 10th name day, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper, from Edmund and Margaret Ashworth, with eternal love. Tears blurred her vision as she slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand and her hand alone. The weight of it felt right, familiar, a tangible connection to the parents she had lost and the life that had been stolen from her. I remember this, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I remember the day they gave it to me. There was a great feast, with music and dancing. My mother fastened it on my finger herself and told me that as long as I wore it, I would carry their love with me always. That ring is known to anyone who knew your family. Ida said gently, it was commissioned specifically for you, and there is no other like it in all of England. Any lord or lady who was acquainted with your parents would recognize it immediately. It is the proof you need. Catherine stared at the ring, watching the emerald gleam in the firelight. It was indeed proof of her identity, but it was also a target painted on her back. If she wore it openly, if anyone with connections to Lord Blackwood saw it, they would know immediately who she was. She would have to be extraordinarily careful about when and how she revealed it. Thank you, she said finally, looking up at Ida with gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you for keeping this safe, for keeping me safe all these years. I know it has not been easy. The old woman reached out and cupped Catherine's cheek with one weathered hand, her touch infinitely gentle. You were the daughter I never had, she said softly. Protecting you has been my greatest honor and my greatest joy. But now you must protect yourself, child. You must be smarter and stronger than your enemies if you are to survive what lies ahead. Over the following days, Catherine began to formulate a plan. She could not remain in Ravenmoor indefinitely, not if she intended to reclaim Ashworth, but neither could she simply march up to the castle gates and demand entry. She needed to establish herself somewhere that would give her access to the nobility, somewhere she could begin to build alliances and gather information. After much thought, she decided that her best course of action would be to seek out Lady Rowena Fairfax. Fairfax Manor was located approximately 30 miles to the west, a journey that would take several days on foot through winter weather. Catherine knew it would be arduous and potentially dangerous, but she also knew it was necessary. Lady Rowena had been her mother's friend, and if anyone might be willing to listen to her story and offer assistance, it would be her. She spent a week preparing for the journey, gathering supplies and making arrangements for Ida's care while she was gone. The old woman protested at first, insisting she was perfectly capable of looking after herself, but Catherine was firm. She arranged for a neighbor, a kind widow named Joan, to check on Ida daily and ensure she had enough firewood and food. She also left what few coins she had earned from her work as a seamstress, money that would keep Ida comfortable for several months if needed. On the morning of her departure, Catherine dressed carefully in her warmest clothing. She wore a dress of thick brown wool, over which she layered a long tunic of dark green that reached to her knees. Her cloak was made of heavy gray wool lined with rabbit fur, with a deep hood that could be pulled up to shield her face from wind and snow. She packed a small leather satchel with dried meat, bread, cheese, and a water skin, along with a change of clothing and the precious ring, which she kept wrapped in its silk cloth for safekeeping, rather than wearing it openly. Ida stood at the cottage door, her eyes red from crying, though she tried to maintain a brave face. "You will send word when you arrive safely?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I will," Catherine promised, embracing the old woman tightly. "And I will return for you, I swear it. When Ashworth is mine again, you will come and live there with me, in comfort and honor as you deserve." "I do not need comfort and honor," Ida said, pulling back to look Catherine in the face. "I only need to know that you are safe and happy. Promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will not take unnecessary risks." "I promise," Catherine said, though they both knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. She kissed Ida's weathered cheek one final time, then turned and walked away before her resolve could weaken. The journey to Fairfax Manor was every bit as difficult as Catherine had anticipated. The roads were treacherous with ice and snow, and there were stretches where she had to forge her own path through drifts that came up to her knees. She spent the first night in a barn belonging to a farmer who took pity on her, allowing her to sleep in the hay loft in exchange for helping his wife with the evening milking. The second night, she found shelter at a small inn, where she paid for a space near the kitchen fire and a bowl of thin stew that was more water than meat. It was on the third day of her journey, as she walked along a narrow road that wound through a dense forest, that she encountered the soldiers. There were 5 of them, mounted on sturdy horses and wearing the livery of Lord Blackwood's household, black tunics emblazoned with the crimson raven. They were laughing amongst themselves, clearly returning from some errand, when they spotted her walking alone. "Well, what have we here?" the leader called out, a burly man with a scarred face and cruel eyes. He guided his horse to block her path, forcing Catherine to stop. "A pretty little bird, all alone in the woods. Don't you know it's dangerous for a woman to travel without protection?" Catherine's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression calm and her voice steady. "I am on my way to visit family," she said, careful to keep her eyes downcast in a show of deference. "I mean no trouble to anyone." "Family, is it?" another soldier said, circling around behind her on his horse. "And where might this family be?" "Fairfax Manor," Catherine replied, seeing no point in lying about her destination. "My cousin is in service there." The soldiers exchanged glances, and Catherine could see them assessing whether she was worth the trouble. She was clearly not wealthy, her clothing was plain and her belongings minimal, but she was young and attractive, which made her vulnerable in other ways. She tensed, preparing to run if necessary, though she knew she would not get far against mounted men. "Fairfax Manor, eh?" the leader said, stroking his bearded chin thoughtfully. "That's still a good day's walk from here. Seems foolish to be traveling alone in weather like this. Perhaps we should escort you, make sure you arrive safely." The way he said it, with a leer that made his true intentions clear, sent a chill down Catherine's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. She took a step backward, her mind racing for some way out of this situation. "That is very kind of you," she said carefully, "but I would not wish to take you out of your way. I am certain I can manage on my own." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," the soldier said, dismounting from his horse with a predatory grin. The others followed suit, forming a loose circle around her. "We insist." Catherine's hand moved instinctively to her belt, where she kept a small knife she used for cutting bread and other simple tasks. It was not much of a weapon, but it was all she had. She drew it, holding it before her with a steady hand despite her fear. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hard. "I do not wish to hurt anyone, but I will defend myself if I must." The soldiers laughed at this, clearly amused by the idea of a young woman with a small knife posing any threat to armed men. The leader reached for her, intending to knock the knife from her hand. But before he could make contact, a voice rang out through the forest, sharp and commanding. "That will be quite enough." Everyone froze, turning to see a lone rider emerging from the trees. He sat astride a magnificent black destrier, a warhorse of exceptional size and power. The rider himself was equally impressive, a tall man with broad shoulders and a powerful build, evident even through the layers of clothing he wore against the cold. He was dressed in fine garments, a black leather jerkin over a tunic of deep blue wool, with a heavy cloak of charcoal gray that was lined with wolf fur. At his side hung a long sword in a decorated scabbard, and the confidence with which he carried himself suggested he knew well how to use it. But it was his face that captured Catherine's attention. He appeared to be perhaps 30 years of age, with strong, aristocratic features that spoke of noble breeding. His hair was dark, almost black, and fell to his shoulders in thick waves. His eyes were a striking pale blue, like ice reflecting winter sky, and they were fixed on the soldiers with an expression of cold authority. A thin scar ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, a mark that only added to his commanding presence rather than detracting from it. His jaw was strong and clean-shaven, and there was something in the set of his mouth that suggested both intelligence and determination. "Lord Devereux," the lead soldier stammered, immediately releasing Catherine and stepping back. The others followed suit, their earlier bravado evaporating in an instant. We were merely offering assistance to this young woman." "Were you?" the man Lord Devereux said coolly, guiding his horse closer. His pale eyes swept over the scene, taking in Catherine's defensive posture and the soldiers' guilty expressions, and clearly coming to his own conclusions about what had been happening. "It appeared to me that you were accosting her. Lord Blackwood's men harassing travelers on the King's Road. That is a serious matter indeed." "My lord, I assure you," the soldier began. But Devereux cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You will return to your duties immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of unquestioned authority. "And you will report to your captain that I witnessed this incident. I will be speaking to Lord Blackwood about the conduct of his men when next we meet. Now go, before I decide to detain you for questioning." The soldiers needed no further encouragement. They mounted their horses hastily and rode off down the road, disappearing quickly into the forest. Catherine remained where she was, her knife still clutched in her hand, unsure whether this new arrival was a savior or simply a different kind of threat. She studied him carefully as he dismounted from his horse with fluid grace, noting the expensive quality of his clothing and the ease with which he had commanded the soldiers' obedience. He was clearly a man of significant rank and power. "You can put the knife away," he said, his tone gentler now as he turned his attention to her. "I mean you no harm. My name is Lord Adrian Devereux, and I hold lands to the north of here. May I ask your name?" Catherine hesitated, then slowly lowered the knife, though she did not sheath it. "Anne," she said, using the name she had lived under for 8 years. "Anne Miller." Lord Adrian Devereux studied her for a long moment, his pale blue eyes thoughtful and assessing. Catherine felt herself being evaluated, not with the crude leering of the soldiers, but with an intelligence that was somehow more unsettling. She had the distinct impression that this man saw far more than most people, that he could read truths written in gestures and expressions that others would miss entirely. "Anne Miller," he repeated, and something in his tone suggested he found the name as unremarkable as she had intended it to be. "You said you were traveling to Fairfax Manor. That is still quite a distance from here, and the weather shows signs of worsening. The clouds are heavy with snow that has not yet fallen." He gestured toward the gray sky, visible through the bare branches of the trees overhead. "You will not reach your destination before nightfall, and these woods are not safe for anyone to traverse in darkness, particularly not a woman traveling alone." Catherine felt a flash of irritation at the implication that she could not care for herself, though she knew he was right. The encounter with the soldiers had proven that, despite her determination and courage, she was vulnerable in ways that a man would not be. "I appreciate your concern, Lord Devereux," she said carefully, "but I have managed thus far. I will find shelter somewhere along the road." "There is no shelter between here and Fairfax Manor," he said bluntly. "The next inn is more than 20 miles distant in the opposite direction, and there are no farms or villages in this particular stretch of forest. The land here belongs to Lord Blackwood, and he does not permit settlement within his hunting grounds." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I have a proposition for you, if you will hear it." Catherine's hand tightened slightly on her knife, her wariness evident. "What sort of proposition?" "Nothing untoward, I assure you," he said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice, as if he found her suspicion both understandable and slightly entertaining. "I am traveling to Fairfax Manor myself, to attend upon Lady Rowena on a matter of business. I departed from my own estates this morning and had planned to reach the manor by tomorrow evening. You are welcome to travel with me. I can offer you protection on the road and proper accommodations tonight at an inn I know to be reputable. We would arrive at Fairfax Manor together, which would perhaps lend you some credibility when you present yourself to the household." It was a sensible offer, and Catherine knew it. Traveling with a lord would indeed provide protection and make her arrival at Fairfax Manor less suspicious. A young woman appearing alone at the gates would raise questions, but arriving in the company of Lord Devereux would suggest she was someone of at least marginal importance. Yet she hesitated, uncertain whether she could trust this stranger, noble or not. Adrian seemed to sense her indecision. "I understand your reluctance," he said, his tone becoming more earnest. "You do not know me, and you have just had an unpleasant encounter that would make anyone cautious. But I give you my word, on my honor as a knight and a lord of this realm, that you will come to no harm while under my protection. You may keep your knife at hand if it provides you comfort, and we will travel in full daylight where anyone might see us. I ask only that you accept assistance that is freely and honestly offered." Catherine found herself studying his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. What she saw was a man who appeared sincere, whose pale blue eyes met hers directly without shifting away. There was strength in that face, yes, but also something that might have been integrity. She thought of Ida's warnings about trusting no one, but she also thought practically about her situation. She was still 2 days from Fairfax Manor. She was tired and cold, and she had just narrowly avoided assault by Lord Blackwood's soldiers. Having a powerful protector, even temporarily, was not something to dismiss lightly. "Very well," she said finally, sheathing her knife at her belt. "I accept your offer, Lord Devereux, and I thank you for your kindness." A smile crossed his face, transforming his stern features into something warmer and more approachable. "Excellent. And please, you may call me Adrian, at least while we travel." Lord Devereux becomes tiresome after several hours of conversation. He moved to his horse and opened one of the saddlebags, withdrawing a pair of leather gloves lined with soft wool. "Here, take these. Your hands are red with cold." Catherine accepted the gloves gratefully, slipping them on, and immediately feeling the warmth they provided. They were too large for her, clearly made for a man's hands, but they were far better than nothing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are very generous." "It is merely practical," he replied, though his tone suggested he was pleased by her gratitude. "Now, my horse can easily carry 2, if you do not mind riding pillion. It will be faster than walking, and it will spare your feet. I noticed you were limping slightly on your left side." Catherine had not realized her limp was visible, but her feet were indeed sore from days of walking on rough roads in boots that, while sturdy, had not been designed for such lengthy travel. "I do not mind," she said, "though I confess I have not ridden in some years." "It will come back to you," Adrian assured her. He led the great black destrier closer and offered Catherine his hand. "Step onto my boot, and I will pull you up behind me." With his assistance, Catherine mounted the horse, settling herself on the broad back behind the saddle. Adrian swung up in front of her with easy athleticism, gathering the reins in his hands. "You will need to hold on," he said over his shoulder. "Grip my waist or my belt, whichever is more comfortable. The road is uneven, and I would not have you fall." Catherine hesitated only briefly before wrapping her arms loosely around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the layers of wool and leather. It was strange to be so close to a man she had just met, strange and somewhat uncomfortable, but she reminded herself that this was simply practical necessity. Adrian did not seem to attach any particular significance to the contact, merely ensuring she was secure before urging the horse forward at a steady walk. They rode in silence for a time, The only sounds the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves on the frozen ground and the occasional call of a winter bird from the bare branches above. Catherine found herself relaxing slightly. The warmth of Adrian's body in front of her and the gentle rocking motion of the horse combining to ease some of the tension that had been coiled tight within her since the encounter with the soldiers. "May I ask what brings you to Fairfax Manor?" Adrian said eventually, his voice carrying easily over the sound of their travel. "You mentioned a cousin in service there." Catherine had anticipated this question and had prepared her answer. "Yes, my cousin Mary works in the kitchens. I am hoping Lady Rowena might have a position for me as well. I have some skill with the needle, and I have heard that the household is in need of seamstresses." It was a plausible story, one that explained her journey and her interest in reaching the manor without revealing anything of her true purpose. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "Lady Rowena is known to be a fair employer," he said. "If your skills are as good as you claim, I am certain she will find use for them. The nobility always have need of those who can create and mend fine garments." "And what brings you to Fairfax Manor?" Catherine asked, curious despite herself. "You mentioned business with Lady Rowena." "I am hoping to secure her support for a petition I intend to present to the king," Adrian explained. "There is a matter of disputed land rights between my estates and those of a neighboring lord. It has been a source of conflict for several years, and I believe it is time to seek royal intervention to resolve it peacefully before it escalates into open warfare." Catherine found this interesting, a glimpse into the complex political maneuvering that occupied the nobility. "Is Lady Rowena influential enough to sway the king's decision?" she asked. "She is more influential than many realize," Adrian said. "Her late husband was a close advisor to the king's father, and she herself has maintained strong connections at court. A letter of support from her carries considerable weight. Moreover, she is known to be wise and judicious in her judgments. If she endorses my petition, others will be more inclined to view it favorably." They continued their journey, and as the miles passed, Catherine found herself drawn into conversation with Adrian. He was an easy man to talk to, well-educated and well-traveled, with a dry wit that occasionally surfaced in his observations about the world. He asked her questions about her life, where she had grown up, what her family was like, and Catherine answered with carefully constructed half-truths, mixing elements of her real past with the fiction of Anne Miller's existence. She learned that Adrian was unmarried, which was unusual for a man of his age and station. When she delicately inquired about this, he smiled ruefully. "I was betrothed once when I was young," he said, "to a lady from a neighboring estate, but she died of a fever 3 weeks before our wedding was to take place. Since then, I have been reluctant to form such attachments. My parents despaired of me ever providing them with grandchildren before they passed. Now I answer to no one but myself regarding such matters." There was old pain in his voice when he spoke of his lost betrothed, and Catherine felt a pang of sympathy for him. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly. "It was many years ago," Adrian replied, though his tone suggested the wound had never entirely healed. "We learn to carry our griefs and continue forward. What other choice do we have?" As the afternoon wore on, the sky grew darker and more ominous, the heavy clouds Adrian had predicted earlier now settling low over the forest. The temperature dropped noticeably, and Catherine was grateful for the warmth of the gloves he had given her and the shelter his body provided from the worst of the wind. They emerged from the forest as dusk was falling, entering an open area where a small village had grown up around a crossroads. "We will stop here for the night," Adrian announced, guiding his horse toward a substantial stone building that bore the sign of an inn. The Rose and Crown, according to the weathered wooden board that hung above the door, creaking slightly in the wind. Warm light spilled from the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney, promising heat and food and rest. Adrian dismounted first, then helped Catherine down from the horse, his hands steadying her as her feet touched the ground. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly before finding her balance. "Easy," he said, his grip firm but gentle. "Take a moment to steady yourself." Once she was stable, he led her inside the inn while a stable boy appeared to take charge of the horse. The interior of the Rose and Crown was warm and welcoming, with a large common room dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a cheerful blaze crackled and popped. Wooden tables and benches were scattered throughout the space, and the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread made Catherine's stomach clench with hunger. She had eaten nothing since the small breakfast she had consumed that morning before encountering the soldiers. The innkeeper, a portly man with a red face and jovial manner, hurried forward when he saw Adrian. "Lord Devereux," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. "It is an honor to have you under our roof once again. I have your usual room prepared, as you sent word ahead that you would be stopping here tonight." "Thank you, Goodman Fletcher," Adrian said, "but I will need 2 rooms tonight. This young lady is under my protection and requires proper accommodation." Fletcher's eyebrows rose slightly, and Catherine could see him making assumptions about her relationship with Adrian, but he was too well trained to voice them. "Of course, my lord. I have another room available, small but clean and comfortable. Will you be dining in the private parlor or in the common room?" "The private parlor, I think," Adrian decided. He glanced at Catherine. "If that is agreeable to you, Mistress Miller, we can discuss our plans for tomorrow's journey in relative privacy." Catherine nodded her agreement, and Fletcher led them through the common room, where several other travelers sat eating and drinking, to a smaller chamber at the back of the inn. It was indeed private, with a single table, several chairs, and its own smaller fireplace. Fletcher promised to bring them food and drink immediately, then bustled away to see to their needs. Once they were alone, Catherine removed her cloak and hung it on a peg near the fire to dry. She was aware that her dress was travel-stained and wrinkled. Her hair had come partially loose from its braid, and she must look thoroughly disheveled. Adrian, by contrast, appeared barely affected by the day's journey, though he too removed his cloak and settled into one of the chairs with a slight sigh that suggested he was more tired than he had let on. "I cannot thank you enough for your assistance today," Catherine said, taking the chair across from him. "Without your intervention, I do not know what would have become of me." "You defended yourself admirably," Adrian said. "That took courage. Most women would have simply submitted to whatever those soldiers intended." He studied her with that penetrating gaze again. "You are not like most women I have met, Anne Miller. There is something about you, something that suggests you have not always lived the simple life of a seamstress." Catherine felt a spike of alarm, wondering what she had revealed without meaning to. "I do not know what you mean," she said carefully. "I am exactly what I appear to be." "Are you?" Adrian asked, but his tone was more curious than accusatory. Before she could respond, Fletcher returned with a serving girl, both carrying trays laden with food. They set out platters of roasted chicken, fresh bread still warm from the oven, a wheel of cheese, baked apples fragrant with cinnamon, and 2 cups of mulled wine that steamed in the cool air. As they ate, the conversation turned to safer topics: the quality of the food, the comfort of the inn, the likelihood of snow overnight. Catherine was acutely aware that Adrian was still studying her, still trying to piece together the puzzle she presented, but he did not press her with direct questions. Instead, he spoke of his own travels, of places he had been and things he had seen, and Catherine found herself genuinely interested in his stories. It was only as the meal was ending and the fire burning low that Adrian returned to more personal matters. "Forgive me if I overstep," he said, his voice quiet and serious, "but I feel compelled to offer you some advice. When we arrive at Fairfax Manor tomorrow, be cautious about whom you trust. These are dangerous times, with factions and alliances shifting constantly. Even those who seem friendly may have hidden agendas." Catherine met his eyes across the table, seeing genuine concern there. "Why do you tell me this?" she asked. "Because I have seen what happens to innocents caught up in the games of power that the nobility play," he said grimly. "And because, despite knowing you for only a few hours, I find I would be troubled if harm came to you." He paused, then added, "Also because I do not think you are nearly as innocent or simple as you pretend to be. I think there is a story behind your journey to Fairfax Manor, one that has nothing to do with seeking employment as a seamstress. But I will not pry into your secrets, Anne Miller, whatever they may be. I will only say that if you ever find yourself in need of an ally, someone who might help you navigate the treacherous waters of noble intrigue, you may call upon me." Catherine was stunned by this offer, unsure how to respond. This man barely knew her, yet he was offering assistance without even knowing what she might need it for. "Why would you do that?" she asked softly. "Why would you involve yourself in the troubles of someone you just met?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring into his cup of wine as if seeking answers there. "When I was young," he said finally, "I knew someone who needed help desperately but was too proud or too frightened to ask for it. I did not realize how dire their situation was until it was too late. That person died, and I have always wondered if I could have prevented it had I been more observant, more willing to offer assistance unbidden. He looked up, meeting her eyes. I do not wish to make that mistake again, so I tell you now, if you need help, you have only to ask. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will remember your offer." They departed the Rose and Crown early the next morning, just as the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The predicted snow had indeed fallen during the night, blanketing the landscape in a fresh layer of pristine white that sparkled in the weak winter sunlight. The world seemed hushed and magical, the snow muffling all sound except for the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the occasional creak of leather as Adrian shifted in the saddle. Catherine rode behind him as she had the previous day, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. She had slept surprisingly well in the small but comfortable room Fletcher had provided, and she felt more rested than she had in days. The hot breakfast of porridge and fresh bread had filled her stomach, and the mulled cider Adrian had ordered to warm them before their departure still spread pleasant heat through her limbs. As they traveled, Catherine found her thoughts returning again and again to Adrian's words from the previous evening. His offer of assistance had been unexpected and deeply touching, but it also complicated matters. She had not planned on forming any attachments or alliances before reaching Fairfax Manor and assessing the situation there. Yet here was a powerful lord, well-connected and apparently honorable, offering to help her with troubles he did not even fully understand. It would be foolish to dismiss such an offer out of hand, but it would be equally foolish to trust too quickly or reveal too much. "You are very quiet this morning," Adrian observed, his voice carrying over his shoulder. "Are you well? The cold is not too much for you?" "I am well," Catherine assured him. "Merely thinking about what awaits me at Fairfax Manor. I confess I am somewhat nervous about presenting myself to Lady Rowena. What if she has no need of seamstresses? What if my cousin has left her service and I have made this journey for nothing? Then you will find another position elsewhere," Adrian said practically. "A woman with your intelligence and resourcefulness will not lack for opportunities, I am certain. And if Lady Rowena has no place for you in her household, perhaps I might offer you employment at Devereux Hall. My own household could certainly use someone skilled with a needle. The servant's livery is in deplorable condition, and I have no one with the expertise to remedy it properly." Catherine smiled at this, touched by his continued kindness. "You are very generous, my lord. But let us hope it does not come to that. I would prefer to remain at Fairfax Manor if possible, to be near my cousin." They rode on through the morning, the landscape gradually changing from dense forest to more open countryside. Fields stretched out on either side of the road, their furrows hidden beneath the snow, bordered by low stone walls and bare hedgerows. In the distance, Catherine could see farmhouses with smoke rising from their chimneys, and occasionally they passed other travelers on the road, peasants heading to market with carts or nobles riding in small groups with their retainers. As midday approached, the imposing structure of Fairfax Manor came into view. It was not as large as Ashworth Castle had been, but it was still an impressive sight. A fortified manor house built of grey stone with a central keep and two wings extending from either side. The manor was surrounded by a stone wall with iron-bound gates that stood open to admit travelers. Beyond the walls, Catherine could see extensive gardens, now dormant for winter, and several outbuildings including stables, a smithy, and what appeared to be servants' quarters. "Here we are," Adrian announced, guiding his horse through the gates and into the courtyard. Servants immediately appeared to assist them, and Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach as she dismounted. This was it, the moment when she would have to present herself to Lady Rowena and somehow convince her of the truth without appearing mad or delusional. A steward approached, bowing deeply to Adrian. "Lord Devereux, we have been expecting you. Lady Rowena sends her greetings and asks that you join her in the solar when you have refreshed yourself from your journey." "Thank you," Adrian replied. He turned to Catherine, his expression kind. "This is Mistress Anne Miller, who has traveled with me from the north. She seeks an audience with Lady Rowena regarding employment. Please see that she is made comfortable, and that her request reaches Lady Rowena's ears." The steward looked at Catherine with professional assessment, taking in her travel-worn appearance and modest clothing. "Of course, my lord. Mistress Miller, if you would follow me, I will show you to a chamber where you may rest and make yourself presentable. I will inform Lady Rowena of your presence." Catherine glanced at Adrian, feeling suddenly reluctant to part from him. He had been her protector and companion for the better part of 2 days, and despite her initial wariness, she had come to trust him. "Thank you again," she said quietly, "for everything." "It was my pleasure," Adrian said, and he seemed to mean it sincerely. "I hope our paths will cross again, Anne Miller. I suspect your story, whatever it may be, is far from finished." With that cryptic comment, he followed another servant toward the main entrance of the manor, leaving Catherine to trail behind the steward through a side door and down a corridor lined with tapestries depicting hunting scenes and family crests. She was led to a small but well-appointed chamber with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest for storage. A fire had been lit in the small hearth, taking the chill from the air. "I will send a maid with water for washing," the steward said. "Lady Rowena will receive you in the solar within the hour. Please make yourself ready." Once she was alone, Catherine quickly unpacked her small bag and withdrew the change of clothing she had brought, a dress of deep blue wool that was her finest garment. It was still simple, befitting her assumed station as a seamstress, but it was clean and well made, showing her skill with a needle. She washed her face and hands with the warm water the maid brought, then carefully rebraided her copper hair, coiling it at the nape of her neck in a style that was both neat and modest. The most difficult decision was whether to wear her mother's ring. Catherine stood before the small mirror in the chamber, turning the ring over in her hands as she debated. Wearing it would immediately identify her to anyone who had known her family, but it would also prove her identity beyond any doubt. Not wearing it meant she would have to rely solely on her words and her memories to convince Lady Rowena of the truth, which seemed far more difficult and uncertain. In the end, she slipped the ring onto her finger, but concealed it beneath the sleeve of her dress. She would reveal it when the moment was right, not before. Satisfied with her appearance, she descended to the solar when a servant came to fetch her, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The solar was a beautiful room, large and airy despite the winter chill, with tall windows that let in streams of pale sunlight. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes of courtly life and mythological tales, and the furniture was of fine carved wood, polished to a gleaming finish. A fire roared in an enormous stone fireplace, and before it sat a woman who could only be Lady Rowena Fairfax. She was perhaps 50 years of age, though she carried those years with grace and dignity. Her hair, still thick and lustrous, was the color of silver touched with hints of gold, arranged in an elaborate coiffure beneath a delicate veil of fine white linen. Her dress was magnificent, made of rich burgundy velvet with sleeves of gold silk, the bodice embroidered with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers worked in gold and silver thread. At her throat she wore a heavy necklace of garnets set in gold, and her fingers glittered with rings. But it was her face that drew Catherine's attention, a strong, intelligent face with keen gray eyes that missed nothing, a straight nose, and a mouth that suggested both kindness and firmness of purpose. Beside Lady Rowena stood a younger woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair and a slender, elegant figure. She wore a gown of forest green wool trimmed with mink fur, and she watched Catherine's approach with undisguised curiosity. "Mistress Miller," Lady Rowena said, her voice cultured and warm, "my steward tells me you seek employment in my household. Please, come closer and tell me of your skills." Catherine advanced into the room, dropping into a deep curtsy, as was proper. "My lady, I am grateful for your willingness to receive me. I have some skill with a needle, and I had hoped you might have need of a seamstress or embroiderer." "We always have need of skilled needleworkers," Lady Rowena said, gesturing for Catherine to rise. "But first I would know something of your background. Where are you from? Who trained you in your craft?" Catherine had prepared answers to these questions, but as she looked into Lady Rowena's shrewd gray eyes, she found herself unable to speak the lies she had rehearsed. There was something about this woman, a quality of wisdom and integrity that made deception feel not only wrong, but impossible. In that moment, Catherine made a decision that would change everything. "My lady," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, "I have not been entirely truthful about my purpose in coming here. I am indeed skilled with a needle, but I did not come seeking employment as a seamstress." She paused, gathering her courage, then continued. "I came seeking your help and your counsel. I came because you were a friend to my mother, and I believe you may be one of the few people left in this world who might be willing to help me reclaim what was stolen from me." The younger woman gasped. But Lady Rowena held up a hand for silence, her eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "Your mother?" she repeated, her voice sharp with sudden interest. "And who, pray tell, was your mother?" Catherine drew a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke the next words, there would be no going back. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing the ring on her finger, the emerald catching the light from the fire and blazing with green fire. "My mother was Lady Margaret Ashworth," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with conviction. "And I am her daughter, Lady Catherine Ashworth, the rightful heir to Ashworth Castle and all its lands and titles." The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Lady Rowena had gone perfectly still, her face draining of color as she stared at the ring on Catherine's finger. The younger woman pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed. Then Lady Rowena rose slowly from her chair, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were in the presence of something fragile that might shatter at any sudden motion. She crossed the room to where Catherine stood and reached out with a trembling hand to touch the ring. Her fingers traced the intricate vine pattern, the emerald at its center, and Catherine saw tears begin to stream down the older woman's face. "Dear God in heaven," Lady Rowena whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "It is truly you. I would know this ring anywhere. Your mother showed it to me the day your father had it made for your 10th name day. She was so proud, so happy." She looked up, searching Catherine's face with hungry eyes. "But how can this be? We were told you died with your parents. Lord Blackwood himself swore that no one survived the night Ashworth Castle fell." "Lord Blackwood lied," Catherine said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "He lied about many things. My father was innocent of the charges brought against him. It was all a fabrication, a conspiracy to steal our lands and destroy our family. I survived only because a loyal knight, Sir William Hartley, managed to get me out of the castle and to safety. I have been living in hiding for 8 years, but I can hide no longer. I have come to you because I need allies, because I need help to reclaim what is rightfully mine." Lady Rowena pulled Catherine into a fierce embrace, holding her tightly as she wept. "Your mother was one of my dearest friends," she said brokenly. "When I heard of her death, of all your deaths, I was devastated. I knew in my heart that your father could not be guilty of treason, but I had no proof, no way to challenge the accusations. And Lord Blackwood was so convincing, so certain in his assertions that justice had been served." She pulled back, gripping Catherine's shoulders and looking into her eyes. "But you are alive. You are here, and by all that is holy I swear to you that I will do everything in my power to help you reclaim your birthright." The younger woman stepped forward, her expression still stunned, but also filled with growing excitement. "My lady," she said to Lady Rowena, "if this is truly Lady Catherine Ashworth, then the entire case against Lord Edmund was built on false premises. If the rightful heir lives, she has every legal right to challenge Lord Blackwood's claim to the Ashworth estates." "Indeed she does," Lady Rowena agreed. She turned to Catherine. "This is Lady Beatrice Weston, my ward and the daughter of an old friend. She is well versed in matters of law and politics, and she will be invaluable in planning how to proceed." She led Catherine to a chair near the fire and pressed her into it, then poured wine from a silver decanter and handed her a goblet. "Drink this, child. You are shaking." Catherine accepted the wine gratefully, her hands indeed trembling as the magnitude of what she had just done began to sink in. She had revealed herself, had placed her life and her future in the hands of these women. There was no taking it back now, no retreat to the safety of anonymity. She was Lady Catherine Ashworth again, and everything depended on what happened next. Lady Rowena settled back into her own chair, her mind clearly working rapidly. "We must proceed carefully," she said. "Lord Blackwood is powerful and dangerous. If he learns you are alive before we have built a strong case and gathered sufficient support, he will move against you immediately. He has too much to lose to allow you to challenge him unchecked." She paused, thinking. "We need to gather evidence of the conspiracy, proof that your father was innocent, and that Lord Blackwood fabricated the accusations. We need to secure the support of other noble houses, enough that the king cannot simply dismiss your claim. And we need to keep you safe while we do all of this." "There is also the matter of Lord Devereux," Lady Beatrice interjected. "He arrived with Lady Catherine. How much does he know?" "He knows only that I am Anne Miller seeking employment. Catherine said, though I think he suspects there is more to my story than I have revealed. He offered me his help, should I ever need it, but I did not tell him the truth. Lady Rowena considered this. Adrian Devereux is a good man and an honorable one. He was acquainted with your father, though not closely. He might be a valuable ally, if we can trust him with the truth. She looked at Catherine intently. What is your feeling about him? Your instinct. Catherine thought about the 2 days she had spent in Adrian's company, about his kindness, his protection, his seemingly genuine concern for her welfare. I believe he is trustworthy, she said slowly. He saved me from Lord Blackwood's soldiers when they would have done me harm, and he has shown me nothing but courtesy and respect. If you think he could be an ally, I would be willing to tell him the truth. Lady Rowena nodded thoughtfully, her fingers drumming lightly on the arm of her chair as she considered their options. Very well. I will speak with Adrian privately and gauge his reaction. If he is willing to support your claim, his influence could prove crucial. The Devereux family, though not as wealthy as some, commands considerable respect among the northern lords. His endorsement would carry weight. She rose from her chair with decisive grace. But first you must rest properly and regain your strength. The coming weeks will be difficult, and you will need all your resources to face what lies ahead. Catherine was shown to a far more luxurious chamber than the one she had initially been given, a guest room befitting her true station. The bed was large and comfortable, draped with heavy curtains of deep crimson velvet to keep out drafts. The walls were hung with beautiful tapestries, and a thick carpet covered the stone floor. A maid was assigned to attend to her needs, a quiet young woman named Sarah, who helped Catherine out of her travel-worn clothing and into a borrowed dress of fine emerald green wool that Lady Rowena had sent up. As Catherine stood before the polished bronze mirror in the chamber, seeing herself properly dressed for the first time in 8 years, she barely recognized her own reflection. The woman looking back at her was no longer Anne Miller, the humble seamstress from Ravenmoor. She was Lady Catherine Ashworth, and the transformation was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, a small dinner was arranged in Lady Rowena's private dining chamber. Present were Lady Rowena herself, Lady Beatrice, and Lord Adrian Devereux, who had been asked to join them on a matter of great importance. Catherine entered the room with her heart pounding, knowing that within moments Adrian would learn the truth of who she really was. He stood when she entered, his pale blue eyes widening slightly as he took in her transformed appearance. The borrowed dress fit her remarkably well, emphasizing her slender figure and complementing the copper tones of her hair, which Sarah had arranged in an elegant style with braids coiled at the crown of her head. For a long moment, Adrian simply stared, and Catherine saw recognition dawn in his expression, not of her identity but of the fact that she was clearly far more than she had claimed to be. Lord Devereux, Lady Rowena began once they were all seated at the intimate table, I have asked you here tonight because a matter has come to my attention that requires the utmost discretion and the support of men I can trust implicitly. What I am about to tell you must not leave this room unless and until we agree collectively on how to proceed. Do I have your word on this? Adrian's expression grew serious and he nodded solemnly. You have my word, Lady Rowena. Whatever you share with me tonight will be held in the strictest confidence. Lady Rowena gestured to Catherine. Then I will let the lady herself reveal the truth. My lord, allow me to properly introduce you to Lady Catherine Ashworth, daughter of the late Lord Edmund Ashworth, and rightful heir to the Ashworth estates. The color drained from Adrian's face as he turned to stare at Catherine with undisguised shock. Catherine Ashworth, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. But that is impossible. The Ashworths were all killed 8 years ago. Lord Blackwood himself confirmed that there were no survivors. Lord Blackwood lied, Catherine said, meeting his gaze directly. I survived, my lord, though only barely. A loyal knight managed to get me to safety before I could be captured and killed along with my parents. I have been living in hiding ever since, under the name Anne Miller. She paused, then added with a slight sad smile, I apologize for the deception during our journey together. I hope you can understand why I could not reveal the truth to a stranger, no matter how kindly he treated me. Adrian was silent for a long moment, his sharp mind clearly working to process this revelation and all its implications. Catherine could see the thoughts racing behind those pale blue eyes, reassessing everything he had observed about her during their time together. all the small inconsistencies that had made him suspect she was not what she appeared to be. Finally he spoke, his voice measured and careful. "If what you say is true, and I have no reason to doubt you given Lady Rowena's endorsement, then Lord Blackwood has committed grievous crimes. He has stolen your inheritance through deception and murder, and he has profited from that theft for 8 years. He leaned forward, his expression intense. But proving these accusations and reclaiming your birthright will be extraordinarily dangerous. Lord Blackwood will not surrender Ashworth without a fight, and he has had years to consolidate his power and influence. We are well aware of the dangers," Lady Beatrice interjected. "That is why we need allies. People we can trust who have the power and influence to support Lady Catherine's claim when the time comes to make it public." Adrian turned his attention to Lady Beatrice, studying her for a moment before returning his gaze to Catherine. "What evidence do you have to support your claim?" he asked practically. "Beyond your own testimony and Lady Rowena's recognition of you, what proof can you offer that you are truly Catherine Ashworth and that your father was innocent of the charges against him?" Catherine held up her hand, showing him the ring. "This was made specifically for me by my father on my 10th name day. It is unique, and anyone who knew my family would recognize it. Lady Rowena knew of it immediately when I showed it to her." Adrian rose from his seat and came around the table to examine the ring more closely. Catherine extended her hand, and he took it gently, studying the intricate workmanship of the gold vines and the brilliant emerald at its center. "I remember seeing this ring," he said quietly. "I attended a feast at Ashworth Castle when I was young, perhaps 20 or 21 years old. Your father had just been appointed to the King's Council, and he held a celebration. You were there, a child with copper hair and green eyes, wearing this very ring. Your mother was so proud of you." He looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes, and she saw belief and determination in his expression. "I believe you are who you claim to be, my lady, and I pledge myself to your cause. I will do everything in my power to help you reclaim what was stolen from you." The relief Catherine felt at these words was so intense it nearly brought her to tears. She had not realized how much she had been hoping for Adrian's support until he offered it so unreservedly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your faith in me means more than you know." Over the course of the dinner, they discussed strategy and planned their next moves. Lady Beatrice, with her knowledge of law and politics, laid out the legal framework for challenging Lord Blackwood's claim to the Ashworth estates. "The key," she explained, "is that Lord Blackwood's title to Ashworth derives entirely from the conviction and execution of Lord Edmund for treason. If we can prove that conviction was based on fabricated evidence, the entire legal foundation of his claim collapses. Catherine, as the direct heir, would have undisputed right to the estates." "But how do we prove the evidence was fabricated?" Catherine asked. "Lord Blackwood claimed to have documents showing my father was plotting against the king. Those documents were presented at the hearing and were apparently convincing enough to secure a conviction. Where are they now, and how can we demonstrate they were forgeries?" "That is indeed the central challenge," Lady Rowena agreed. "The documents would likely be held in the royal archives or possibly in Lord Blackwood's personal possession. Accessing them will be difficult, and proving forgery after 8 years will be even more so." Adrian had been listening intently, and now he spoke up. "There may be another approach," he said thoughtfully. "What if, instead of trying to prove the documents were forged, we find witnesses who can testify to Lord Blackwood's conspiracy? There must have been others involved in the plot. Soldiers who carried out the attack on Ashworth Castle, officials who were bribed to overlook irregularities, perhaps even the forger himself who created the false documents. If we can find these people and convince them to testify truthfully, their evidence would be far more compelling than any analysis of old documents." Lady Beatrice's eyes lit up with interest. "That is an excellent point, Lord Devereux. Witness testimony, particularly from multiple sources, would be very difficult to refute. But how do we find these witnesses, and more importantly, how do we convince them to betray Lord Blackwood? He will have ensured their silence through either generous rewards or terrifying threats." "We appeal to their self-interest," Adrian said pragmatically. "We offer them immunity from prosecution and perhaps financial compensation in exchange for their truthful testimony. And we make it clear that Lord Blackwood's days of power are numbered, that they would be wise to align themselves with the winning side while they still can." Catherine listened to this discussion with growing hope. These were intelligent, capable people who were taking her cause seriously and applying their considerable skills to solving the seemingly impossible problem of unseating Lord Blackwood. For the first time since learning the truth of her identity, she began to believe that reclaiming Ashworth might actually be possible. "There is one witness I would very much like to find," she said quietly. "Sir William Hartley, the knight who saved my life and brought me to safety. If he still lives, his testimony would be invaluable. He was there that night. He saw what happened. He could confirm that the attack on my family was orchestrated by Lord Blackwood and had nothing to do with any actual treason on my father's part." Lady Rowena's expression grew troubled. "Finding Sir William, assuming he survived, will be extremely difficult. He would have gone into hiding to avoid execution. He could be anywhere in England or even abroad. I have contacts," Adrian offered. "Men who move in circles where fugitives and exiles might be found. I can make discreet inquiries, see if anyone has heard of a knight named William Hartley. It will take time, but it is worth attempting." As the evening wore on and the candles burned lower, they continued to refine their plans. It was decided that Catherine would remain at Fairfax Manor for the time being, hidden from public view while they worked to build their case. Lady Rowena would begin quietly reaching out to other noble families who had been friendly with Lord Edmund, testing their loyalties and gauging whether they might support Catherine's claim. Adrian would return to his own estates but would use his network of contacts to search for potential witnesses and gather information about Lord Blackwood's current activities and vulnerabilities. Lady Beatrice would focus on the legal aspects, researching precedents and preparing the formal petition that would eventually be presented to the king. "We need to be absolutely certain of our legal ground before we make any public move," she emphasized. "The king will not look favorably on what he perceives as baseless accusations against one of his lords, particularly when those accusations involve overturning a treason conviction." "How long do you estimate before we will be ready to act?" Catherine asked, trying to be patient but feeling the urgency of her situation acutely. "Several months at minimum," Lady Rowena said gently. "Perhaps as long as a year. I know this is frustrating, Catherine, but we cannot rush this. If we move too quickly, or without adequate preparation, we will fail, and failure will likely cost you your life." Catherine nodded, understanding the wisdom in this counsel, even as every fiber of her being yearned to march immediately to Ashworth and confront Lord Blackwood with his crimes. "I understand," she said quietly. "I have waited 8 years. I can wait a little longer if it means we succeed." After dinner concluded, Adrian prepared to depart for his own estates. He would leave at first light the following morning and had much to prepare before then. Catherine walked with him to the courtyard where his horse was being readied, wanting a moment of private conversation before he left. The night was clear and bitterly cold, with stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Their breath came out in white clouds as they stood together in the torchlight, the sounds of the stable hands preparing Adrian's horse a soft background to their conversation. "I want to thank you again," Catherine said, pulling her borrowed cloak more tightly around herself against the chill, "for believing me, for supporting me. You could have easily dismissed my claim as the delusion of a disturbed young woman." "I could never think that of you," Adrian said, his pale blue eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. "Even when I believed you were merely Anne Miller, a seamstress seeking employment, I could see you were extraordinary. Now that I know the truth of who you are, it all makes perfect sense. The way you carry yourself, the intelligence in your eyes, the courage you showed when facing those soldiers, these are the qualities of a nobly born lady, not a simple peasant." Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold night air. There was something in the way Adrian looked at her, something in his tone when he spoke to her, that suggested his interest in her cause was not purely political or based solely on his friendship with her late father. She found herself studying his face in the torchlight, noting the strength in his features, the intelligence in those remarkable eyes, the way the scar on his cheek somehow enhanced rather than detracted from his appearance. "Will you be safe traveling alone?" she asked, aware that her concern for him was perhaps more personal than it should be given how recently they had met. "I have made this journey many times," he assured her, "and I am well armed and capable of defending myself if necessary." "It is you who must be careful, Catherine. Do not leave the protection of Fairfax Manor. and do not trust anyone outside of this small circle we have formed tonight. Lord Blackwood has eyes and ears everywhere, and if word reaches him that you live, he will move swiftly and ruthlessly to eliminate you. I will be careful, Catherine promised, and I will await word from you regarding your search for Sir William and any other information you can gather. Adrian reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in both of his. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through Catherine that had nothing to do with the cold. I will write to you regularly, he said, his voice soft and earnest, and I will return to Fairfax Manor as soon as I have news to report. In the meantime, know that you are constantly in my thoughts and that I will do everything in my power to help you succeed in reclaiming your birthright. Why? Catherine asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop it. Why are you doing this for me? You barely know me, yet you have pledged yourself so completely to my cause. Is it only because of your respect for my father, or is there something more? Adrian was silent for a long moment, and Catherine saw something shift in his expression, a vulnerability she had not seen before. When I first encountered you on the road, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, you were merely a young woman in distress, someone who needed assistance. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because I could not stand by and allow you to come to harm. But during our journey together, I found myself increasingly drawn to you. Your intelligence, your courage, your quiet strength in the face of circumstances that would have broken a lesser person, all of these things fascinated me. He paused, seeming to struggle with whether to continue, then forged ahead. And then tonight, when I learned who you truly are, when I saw you as Lady Catherine Ashworth rather than as Anne Miller, something shifted within me. I realized that my interest in you, my desire to help you, stems from more than simple chivalry or political alliance. I find myself caring about you, Catherine, in ways that go beyond what would be appropriate for such a brief acquaintance. He smiled ruefully. Perhaps I am a fool to admit this so openly, but I have never been skilled at hiding my feelings. Catherine felt her heart racing, her thoughts in turmoil. She had not expected such a confession, had not anticipated that Adrian's kindness might be motivated by personal attraction, and yet, if she was honest with herself, she could not deny that she had felt something as well during their time together, an awareness of him that went beyond gratitude for his protection. You are not a fool, she said softly, and I would be lying if I said I had not felt something as well. But Adrian, we barely know each other. These feelings, whatever they are, they may be nothing more than the intensity of the situation we find ourselves in. Perhaps, Adrian acknowledged, or perhaps they are the beginning of something more. But regardless, I want you to know that my support for your cause is not conditional on your returning my feelings. Whether you come to care for me as I care for you, or whether you regard me merely as a friend and ally, I will still fight for your right to reclaim Ashworth. You have my word on that. Catherine squeezed his hand, deeply moved by his honesty and integrity. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for your help, for your honesty, for your faith in me. I cannot promise you anything regarding my feelings. It is all too new and uncertain, but I can promise you my trust and my friendship, and perhaps in time, that might grow into something more. That is enough for me, Adrian said, raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles in a gesture that was both courtly and deeply personal. Be safe, Catherine. I will return to you as soon as I can. The weeks following Adrian's departure passed with agonizing slowness for Catherine. She remained secluded within Fairfax Manor, spending her days in Lady Rowena's company, learning about the current state of the nobility and the complex web of alliances and enmities that defined the political landscape. Lady Beatrice proved to be an invaluable teacher, patiently explaining the intricacies of law and court procedure, preparing Catherine for the legal battles that would inevitably come once they made their move against Lord Blackwood. Catherine also spent considerable time corresponding with Ida, sending letters through trusted messengers to ensure the old woman knew she was safe and well. Ida's responses were filled with relief and cautious optimism, along with stern reminders to be careful and not to trust too quickly. The old woman's wisdom, born of years of survival in difficult circumstances, remained a steady anchor for Catherine even from a distance. As winter gradually began to soften into early spring, the first responses to Lady Rowena's quiet inquiries among the nobility started to arrive. Some were encouraging, lords and ladies who remembered Lord Edmund fondly and expressed willingness to consider supporting Catherine's claim if sufficient evidence could be presented. Others were more cautious, unwilling to commit themselves without knowing more about the strength of her case. And a few were outright hostile, warning Lady Rowena that attempting to overturn Lord Blackwood's legitimate title to Ashworth would be seen as sedition and dealt with accordingly. "We are making progress," Lady Rowena assured Catherine one afternoon as they sat together in the solar, reviewing the latest batch of correspondence. "Slowly, yes, but progress nonetheless. Lord Pemberton's son Edmund has pledged his support, as has Lady Margaret of Thornbury. Both are influential voices in the Northern Territories." Catherine studied the letters, noting the careful phrasing and the conditions attached to most of the pledges of support. "They all want proof," she observed. "They want to be certain before they commit themselves fully. I cannot blame them. It is a dangerous position to take, opposing a lord who has the king's favor. Which is why finding witnesses to testify about Lord Blackwood's conspiracy is so crucial," Lady Beatrice said. She was seated at a writing desk by the window, working on yet another draft of the legal petition they would eventually present. "Witness testimony will provide the proof these lords require to feel confident supporting your claim." A knock at the door interrupted their discussion, and a servant entered with a message. "My lady," he said, bowing to Lady Rowena, "a messenger has arrived from Lord Devereux. He says he carries urgent news and requests an immediate audience." Catherine's heart leaped at the mention of Adrian's name. She had received several letters from him over the past weeks, carefully worded missives that discussed his progress in gathering information, while also including personal observations and kind words that made her smile despite the gravity of their situation. But for him to send a messenger with urgent news rather than waiting for the next scheduled correspondence suggested something significant had happened. "Show him in immediately," Lady Rowena commanded. The messenger who entered was a young man, travel-worn and clearly exhausted from a hard ride. He bowed deeply and produced a sealed letter, which Lady Rowena took and immediately broke open. Catherine watched anxiously as the older woman's eyes scanned the contents, seeing her expression shift from curiosity to surprise to something that might have been triumph. "What is it?" Catherine asked, unable to contain her impatience. "What has Adrian discovered?" Lady Rowena looked up, her gray eyes shining with excitement. "He has found Sir William Hartley. Or rather, he has found someone who knows where Sir William can be located. The knight has been living in Scotland under an assumed name, working as a weapons master for a minor clan chieftain. Adrian is traveling there now to speak with him and determine if he would be willing to return to England and testify on your behalf." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes at this news. Sir William, the man who had saved her life at great personal cost, the one witness who could provide first-hand testimony about the night her family was destroyed, was alive. After 8 years of not knowing whether he had survived or perished, she would finally learn his fate and perhaps have the opportunity to thank him for his sacrifice. "When will Adrian return?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "He estimates another fortnight," Lady Rowena replied, reading from the letter. "He says the journey to Scotland and back will take considerable time, and he must also convince Sir William to trust him and agree to return. It is not a simple matter, as the knight has been living as a fugitive all these years and may be reluctant to risk exposure." The waiting was torture for Catherine. Each day seemed to stretch endlessly as she imagined Adrian's journey north, his meeting with Sir William, the difficult conversation that would ensue. She threw herself into preparations for the confrontation with Lord Blackwood that would inevitably come, practicing the testimony she would give, memorizing the legal arguments Lady Beatrice had prepared, steeling herself mentally and emotionally for what lay ahead. She also found herself thinking frequently about Adrian himself, about the confession he had made before departing. His words had awakened something within her, a awareness of him as more than just an ally or friend. She found herself remembering small details from their journey together, the warmth of his body when she had ridden behind him, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her, the strength of his hands when he had helped her mount and dismount from his horse. These memories stirred feelings she had not experienced in years, feelings she had thought were forever buried beneath the weight of loss and the necessity of survival. Late one evening, unable to sleep, Catherine stood at the window of her chamber, looking out over the darkened grounds of Fairfax Manor. The moon was full and bright, casting silver light over the gardens and casting deep shadows beneath the trees. She was so lost in thought that she did not hear the door to her chamber open, did not realize anyone had entered until Lady Beatrice spoke softly behind her. "You are thinking of him, are you not, Lord Devereux?" Catherine turned, startled but not displeased by the intrusion. Lady Beatrice had become a true friend over the weeks they had spent together, and there was genuine warmth in her dark eyes. "Is it so obvious?" Catherine asked with a small, rueful smile. "Only to someone who knows what to look for," Beatrice replied, moving to stand beside Catherine at the window. "I have seen the way you react when his letters arrive, the way your eyes light up when his name is mentioned, and I have seen the way he looks at you as if you are the most precious thing in his world." She paused, then added gently, "There is no shame in caring for him, Catherine. He is a good man, honorable and brave. Your parents would have approved of such a match." "But is it real?" Catherine asked, voicing the doubt that had been plaguing her. "Or is it simply the intensity of the situation that has thrown us together? When all of this is over, when I have reclaimed Ashworth and the immediate danger has passed, will these feelings remain, or will they fade like mist in the morning sun?" Beatrice considered this thoughtfully. "I cannot answer that question for you," she said. "Only time will tell whether what you feel for Lord Devereux is lasting love, or merely the passionate gratitude of someone who has found an ally in a desperate time. But I will tell you this. It is possible for both things to be true simultaneously. It is possible to feel genuine gratitude for someone's help, and also to love them deeply for who they are as a person. The two are not mutually exclusive." Catherine pondered these words long after Beatrice had bid her good night and returned to her own chamber. She realized that part of her hesitation about acknowledging her feelings for Adrian stemmed from fear that caring for him would make her vulnerable, that losing him would add another layer of grief to the already substantial burden she carried. But she also recognized that living in fear of loss was no way to live at all, that love, whenever and however it came, was a gift to be treasured rather than rejected out of caution. The fortnight passed, and then another week beyond that, with no word from Adrian. Catherine's anxiety grew with each passing day, imagining all the things that might have gone wrong. Perhaps Sir William had refused to see him. Perhaps the journey had proven too dangerous and Adrian had been waylaid by bandits or worse. Perhaps Lord Blackwood had somehow learned of their plans and had moved against them. It was late afternoon on a day in early March when the lookout on Fairfax Manor's walls called out that riders were approaching. Catherine, who had been in the library with Lady Beatrice reviewing documents, immediately rushed to the window, her heart pounding. She could see 3 figures on horseback making their way up the road toward the manor, and even from a distance she recognized Adrian's distinctive black destrier and his tall, powerful form in the saddle. She did not wait for formal announcement but ran down the stairs and out into the courtyard, propriety forgotten in her relief and eagerness. By the time Adrian dismounted, she was there, and without thinking, she threw her arms around him in an embrace that was entirely improper, but felt absolutely necessary. Adrian, clearly surprised but not displeased, wrapped his arms around her and held her close for a moment before gently setting her back. "My lady," he said, his pale blue eyes warm with pleasure at her greeting, "I am glad to see you as well. I have brought someone who very much wishes to speak with you." Catherine turned to look at the other 2 riders who had accompanied Adrian. One was clearly a servant or guard, but the other was a man who made her breath catch in her throat. He was perhaps 40 years of age, with graying brown hair and a weathered face marked by scars and hard years. But it was his eyes that Catherine recognized, warm brown eyes that had looked at her with kindness and determination on the worst night of her life. "Sir William," she breathed, tears streaming down her face as she moved toward him. The knight dismounted and stood before her, his own eyes glistening with moisture. "Lady Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I had prayed for years that you were safe, that my actions that night had not been in vain. To see you here, alive and well and grown into such a beautiful young woman, it is more than I dared hope for." Catherine embraced him as she had embraced Adrian, this man who had sacrificed everything to save her. "You gave me my life," she said through her tears. "You risked everything, lost everything, so that I might survive. I have never forgotten what you did for me and for my family. I owe you a debt I can never fully repay." "You owe me nothing," Sir William said firmly, though his voice was gentle. "It was my honor and my duty to protect you, and I would do it again without hesitation." Your father was the finest man I ever knew, and your mother was kindness personified. Saving their daughter was the very least I could do to honor their memory." Lady Rowena appeared in the courtyard, having been alerted to the arrival of the riders, and she immediately took charge of the situation with her characteristic efficiency. "Come inside, all of you," she commanded. "You must be exhausted from your journey, and there is much to discuss. Sir William, you are most welcome in my home. Any friend of Lady Catherine's is a friend of mine." Once they were settled in the solar with wine and food before them, Sir William began to tell his story. He described in detail the events of that terrible night 8 years ago, how Lord Blackwood's soldiers had arrived at Ashworth Castle with forged documents claiming to act on the king's authority, how they had arrested Lord Edmund without trial or hearing, how they had murdered the servants who tried to resist, and how Lady Margaret had taken her own life rather than face dishonor. "I was in the guardroom when they came," Sir William said, his face haunted by the memories. "I heard the commotion and ran to see what was happening. I found Lady Catherine in her chambers, terrified and confused, not understanding why soldiers were destroying her home. I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong, that this was not a legitimate arrest but an assassination disguised as justice. I made the decision in that moment to save what I could, and what I could save was the young lady." He described how he had fought his way through the castle, killing 3 of Blackwood's men and wounding several others, how he had used the servants' passages to evade pursuit, how he had gotten Catherine out through a hidden postern gate and fled into the night. "I took her to Old Ida because I knew the woman could be trusted, and because she lived far enough from Ashworth that no one would think to look there." He continued, "I stayed with them only long enough to ensure Lady Catherine would survive her injuries. She had been struck on the head during the chaos and was barely conscious, and then I fled north before Lord Blackwood's men could track me down." "You have been in Scotland all this time?" Catherine asked. "Aye," Sir William confirmed. "I took service with Clan MacLeod under the name William Grey. I have lived quietly, teaching young men the arts of war, trying to forget the horrors I witnessed that night. But I never truly forgot, and I never stopped hoping that someday justice might be served." Lady Beatrice leaned forward intently. "Sir William, would you be willing to testify before the king about what you witnessed? Would you swear under oath that Lord Edmund was innocent of treason, and that Lord Blackwood orchestrated the entire conspiracy?" "I would swear it on my very soul," Sir William said with fierce conviction. "I would shout it from the rooftops if it would help Lady Catherine reclaim what is rightfully hers. Lord Edmund was no traitor. He was a loyal servant of the crown who was murdered by a greedy, ambitious man who coveted his lands and titles. I saw it with my own eyes, and I will testify to that truth before the king, before Parliament, before God himself if necessary." Adrian, who had been listening quietly while Sir William spoke, now added his own observations. "I have also gathered information from other sources during my travels," he said. "There is a man, a clerk who worked in the Royal Archives 8 years ago, who claims to have been paid by Lord Blackwood to certify certain documents as authentic when he knew they were forgeries. He is terrified of retaliation, but I believe he can be convinced to testify if we can guarantee his safety." "This is exactly what we needed," Lady Rowena said, excitement evident in her voice. "Witness testimony from credible sources, people who can speak to Lord Blackwood's conspiracy from direct knowledge, combined with Catherine's identity as the legitimate heir, proven by the ring and by the recognition of those who knew her family, we have the foundation for a compelling case." Over the following weeks, the momentum of their cause built steadily. With Sir William's testimony secured, and the promise of additional witnesses willing to speak against Lord Blackwood, Lady Beatrice finalized the legal petition that would be presented to the king. The document was a masterwork of legal argumentation, carefully laying out the case for Catherine's rightful claim to the Ashworth estates, while simultaneously exposing the conspiracy that had resulted in her father's wrongful execution. During this time, Catherine found herself spending increasing amounts of time in Adrian's company. He had remained at Fairfax Manor rather than returning to his own estates, claiming that his presence was necessary to coordinate the various elements of their plan. But Catherine suspected and hoped that his reasons were more personal than purely strategic. Their conversations grew longer and more intimate, moving beyond discussions of politics and legal strategy to explore their thoughts, their dreams, their fears, and hopes for the future. One evening, as they walked together through Lady Rowena's gardens, now beginning to show the first signs of spring, with crocuses pushing through the last patches of snow and buds forming on the bare branches of trees. Adrian took Catherine's hand in his. The touch was warm and gentle, and Catherine did not pull away, but instead interlaced her fingers with his, feeling the rightness of the connection. "I have been thinking about the future," Adrian said quietly, as they walked along a gravel path bordered by dormant rose bushes. "About what will happen after we succeed in reclaiming Ashworth for you, as I am certain we will." "And what have you concluded?" Catherine asked, her heart beating faster at the serious tone in his voice. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her, his pale blue eyes intense in the fading light of dusk. "I have concluded that I do not wish to imagine a future in which you are not a central part of my life," he said. "These past months of knowing you, of working alongside you, of watching your courage and determination as you fight for justice, have convinced me that what I feel for you is not merely the intensity of the moment, but something far deeper and more lasting." Catherine felt her breath catch in her throat as she looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his expression. "Adrian," she whispered, not entirely certain what she wanted to say, but needing to say something. "I am asking you to consider, when this is all over, and you are restored to your rightful place, whether you might be willing to share that place with me," Adrian continued. "I am asking if you would consider becoming my wife, joining the Devereux and Ashworth houses through marriage. It would be a powerful alliance politically, but more than that, it would make me the happiest man in England." Catherine had known this moment was coming, had felt the progression of their relationship moving inexorably toward this question. And as she stood there in the twilight garden with Adrian's hand warm in hers, she realized that her answer had been forming for weeks without her fully acknowledging it. She did love him, not just for his help and support in her cause, but for who he was as a man, for his honor and kindness, his intelligence and courage, his gentle humor, and the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. "Yes," she said simply, a smile spreading across her face as she spoke. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. I cannot imagine a future without you either, and I would be honored to be your wife." The joy that lit up Adrian's face was beautiful to behold. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of promise for the future they would build together. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless and smiling, Catherine felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. She would have Adrian by her side, and that knowledge gave her strength and comfort beyond measure. They kept their betrothal private for the time being, sharing the news only with Lady Rowena, Lady Beatrice, and Sir William. All three were delighted, with Lady Rowena embracing Catherine warmly and declaring that her parents would have been overjoyed by such a match. "Lord Devereux is everything one could hope for in a son-in-law," she said with satisfaction. "Noble, honorable, and clearly devoted to you. Your mother would have been planning the wedding feast already." The moment of happiness was brief, however, as reality soon reasserted itself. They still had to present their case to the king, still had to face Lord Blackwood's inevitable counterattack, still had to navigate the dangerous waters of court politics where one misstep could prove fatal. Lady Beatrice set a date for their departure to the royal court, allowing them 1 month to make final preparations and ensure that all their witnesses were ready to testify. During that month, Catherine trained intensively for the ordeal ahead. Lady Rowena coached her on court etiquette and protocol, teaching her how to address the king properly, how to conduct herself with the dignity befitting her station, how to navigate the subtle social hierarchies that governed interactions among the nobility. Sir William worked with her on her testimony, helping her organize her memories of that terrible night into a coherent narrative that would be compelling and credible. And Adrian simply provided support and encouragement, his presence a constant source of strength. As the day of departure approached, Catherine sent word to Ida, informing the old woman of her plans and promising to send for her once the matter was resolved. Ida's response was characteristically blunt, warning Catherine to be careful and not to trust the king's justice too blindly, but also expressing pride in the young woman Catherine had become. "You are your father's daughter," Ida wrote, "and you will do what must be done with courage and grace. I will be waiting to hear of your triumph." The journey to the royal court took nearly a week, as Catherine traveled in a proper carriage this time, befitting her station as Lady Catherine Ashworth rather than as the humble Anne Miller. Adrian rode alongside the carriage on his black destrier, and they were accompanied by a substantial retinue including Sir William, several armed guards, and servants to attend to their needs. Lady Rowena and Lady Beatrice traveled with them as well, determined to see this matter through to its conclusion. As they drew closer to the capital, Catherine felt her anxiety growing. Everything they had worked for over the past months would come down to a single audience with the king, a single opportunity to present their case and convince him to overturn Lord Blackwood's claim to Ashworth. If they failed, if the king dismissed their petition or worse, viewed it as sedition, Catherine would lose everything, possibly including her life. The night before they were to appear at court, Catherine found sleep impossible. She rose from her bed in the inn where they were staying and wrapped a cloak around herself, intending to step outside for some fresh air to calm her nerves. She found Adrian already in the courtyard, apparently unable to sleep as well. He was standing near the stables, staring up at the star-filled sky with his hands clasped behind his back. "You should be resting," Catherine said softly as she approached him. "Tomorrow will be difficult, and you need your strength." "I could say the same to you," Adrian replied with a slight smile, turning to face her. "But I suspect we are both too anxious to sleep. Come, walk with me a while. Perhaps moving will ease some of the tension." They walked through the quiet streets of the capital, staying in the well-lit areas where it was safe to wander even at night. The city was vastly different from the rural villages and estates Catherine had known, with buildings crowding close together, narrow streets winding in confusing patterns, and even at this late hour, the sounds of taverns and markets drifting through the air. "Are you frightened?" Adrian asked as they walked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "What if we have misjudged? What if the king refuses to hear us or dismisses our evidence as insufficient? What if Lord Blackwood has somehow learned of our plans and has prepared a defense we cannot counter? Then we will face whatever comes together," Adrian said firmly. "But I do not believe we will fail, Catherine. We have truth on our side, we have credible witnesses, we have the law supporting our claim, and we have something else as well. We have you. When the king sees you, when he hears you speak about your father and your family, when he sees the ring on your finger and recognizes the truth of who you are, he will have no choice but to acknowledge your claim. You have more faith than I do," Catherine said with a shaky laugh. "Then let my faith sustain us both," Adrian replied, stopping to face her and taking both her hands in his. "I believe in you, Catherine. I believe in your cause and in your right to reclaim what was stolen from you. And I believe that tomorrow we will achieve the justice your family deserves." Catherine drew strength from his conviction, from the steady certainty in his eyes. She stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that kiss. And he responded with equal passion, his arms wrapping around her and holding her close as if he could shield her from all the dangers and uncertainties of the world through the sheer force of his will. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful spring day that seemed at odds with the gravity of what was to come. Catherine dressed with painstaking care in a gown that Lady Rowena had commissioned specifically for this occasion. It was made of rich burgundy velvet, the same color her mother had favored, with sleeves of cream silk and an overdress of deep green that matched her eyes. The bodice was embroidered with gold thread in patterns of oak leaves and acorns, symbols of the Ashworth family. Her copper hair was arranged in an elaborate style with braids coiled at the crown of her head, and she wore her mother's ring prominently on her right hand, where it would be clearly visible. When she descended to join the others, she saw approval and pride in their faces. "You look every inch a lady of noble birth," Lady Rowena said with satisfaction. "The king will have no doubt about your lineage when he sees you." The royal court was held in a magnificent hall within the palace, a vast space with soaring ceilings, stained glass windows that cast colored light across the marble floors, and walls hung with tapestries depicting the glorious history of the realm. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais, sat the king on his throne, a man in his middle years with a stern face and calculating eyes. Around him stood his advisors and courtiers, a sea of richly dressed nobles who watched the proceedings with varying degrees of interest. Lord Blackwood was already present, standing to one side of the hall with his own retinue of supporters. Catherine felt her heart clench with hatred and fear when she saw him for the first time in 8 years. He was a tall man with dark hair streaked with gray, a sharp aristocratic face, and cold eyes that missed nothing. He wore black and crimson, his family colors, and he carried himself with the arrogant confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. When their party was announced and Catherine stepped forward, she saw Lord Blackwood's face go white with shock. His eyes widened as he stared at her, clearly recognizing her despite the years that had passed and the changes wrought by time. She saw fear flash across his features before he mastered himself, and his expression became a carefully neutral mask. "Your Majesty," Lady Rowena said, stepping forward and curtsying deeply before the king. "I come before you with a matter of grave importance, a matter of justice long delayed. I present to you Lady Catherine Ashworth, daughter of the late Lord Edmund Ashworth, who was wrongfully convicted of treason 8 years ago. Lady Catherine has evidence that her father was innocent of the charges brought against him, and that his conviction was the result of a conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Blackwood for the purpose of stealing the Ashworth estates." A murmur ran through the assembled courtiers at these words, and the king leaned forward on his throne, his eyes sharp with interest as he studied Catherine. "Lady Catherine Ashworth is dead," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Lord Blackwood himself testified that there were no survivors when Ashworth Castle was taken. Are you claiming this young woman is an impostor?" "I am claiming she is exactly who she appears to be, Your Majesty," Lady Rowena replied calmly, "and we have brought proof of her identity as well as witnesses who can testify to the conspiracy that destroyed her family." "This is absurd," Lord Blackwood said, his voice sharp and dismissive as he stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is clearly some plot to discredit me and steal lands that are rightfully mine by grant of your royal decree. I do not know who this young woman is or who has put her up to this charade, but she is certainly not Catherine Ashworth. The entire family perished 8 years ago, as I witnessed with my own eyes." "You are a liar," Catherine said, her voice ringing out clear and strong through the hall. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their collective gaze but did not falter. "You murdered my father based on false evidence you yourself created. You drove my mother to her death, and you would have killed me as well if not for the courage of a loyal knight who saved my life at great personal cost. I am Lady Catherine Ashworth, and I have come to reclaim what you stole from my family." The king held up a hand for silence as the murmuring in the hall grew louder. "These are serious accusations," he said gravely. "If what you claim is true, Lady Catherine, then a great injustice has been done. But I will not overturn the conviction of a nobleman and strip him of his lawfully granted estates based solely on your word. You must provide proof of your identity and evidence of this alleged conspiracy." "We are prepared to do so, Your Majesty," Lady Beatrice said, stepping forward with the carefully prepared documents. "If it pleases Your Majesty, we have witnesses ready to testify, and Lady Catherine herself bears physical proof of her identity that can be verified by anyone who knew her family." The king gestured for Lady Beatrice to approach, and she presented the documents with a deep curtsy. His Majesty took the papers and began to read through them, his expression unreadable as his eyes scanned the carefully crafted legal arguments. The hall remained silent save for the rustle of parchment and the occasional whisper among the courtiers. Catherine stood with her back straight and her head held high, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. Beside her she could feel Adrian's supportive presence, and it gave her courage. After what seemed like an eternity, the king looked up from the documents. "You claim to have witnesses who can testify to Lord Blackwood's conspiracy," he said. "Let them come forward and speak." Sir William stepped forward first, his weathered face stern and resolute as he bowed before the throne. "Your Majesty, I am Sir William Hartley, formerly in the service of Lord Edmund Ashworth. I was present at Ashworth Castle on the night it fell 8 years ago, and I can testify under oath that what happened that night was not justice but murder, disguised as lawful arrest." "Proceed," the king commanded, settling back on his throne to listen. Sir William's testimony was devastating in its detail and emotional power. He described the arrival of Lord Blackwood's soldiers, how they had burst into the castle without warning or proper warrant, how they had produced documents claiming to act on the king's authority, but had refused to allow Lord Edmund time to examine them or mount any defense. He spoke of the violence that had ensued when the Ashworth guards attempted to protect their lord, of the servants who had been cut down without mercy, of Lady Margaret's desperate grief when she learned her husband had been taken. "I fought my way to Lady Catherine's chambers," Sir William continued, his voice thick with remembered horror. "She was just a girl of 15, terrified and confused, not understanding why her home was being destroyed around her. I knew in that moment that this was not a legitimate arrest, that Lord Blackwood intended to kill everyone who might challenge his claim to the Ashworth estates. I made the decision to save what I could, and what I could save was the young lady. I got her out of the castle and took her to a place of safety. Then I fled for my own life because I knew Lord Blackwood would hunt down anyone who could testify to what really happened that night. "And where have you been these past 8 years?" the king asked. "Living in exile in Scotland, Your Majesty, under an assumed name. Always fearful that Lord Blackwood's agents would find me and silence me permanently. But when Lord Devereux brought word that Lady Catherine still lived and was prepared to seek justice, I knew I had to return, no matter the personal risk. The truth must be told, and Lord Edmund's name must be cleared of the false charges that led to his execution." The king turned his attention to Lord Blackwood, whose face had grown increasingly pale during Sir William's testimony. "What say you to these accusations, Lord Blackwood? This knight claims to have witnessed events that directly contradict your account of what transpired at Ashworth Castle." Lord Blackwood drew himself up, his expression indignant. "Your Majesty, this man is a fugitive from justice, wanted for killing 3 of my soldiers during the lawful arrest of a traitor. Of course, he would fabricate lies to justify his crimes and undermine my legitimate authority. His testimony is worthless, the desperate fabrications of a criminal seeking to avoid punishment." "Then let us hear from another witness," Adrian said, stepping forward. "Your Majesty, we have brought with us a clerk who worked in the Royal Archives 8 years ago. He has information about the documents that were used to convict Lord Edmund of treason." The clerk, a nervous, thin man in his middle years, was brought forward. He trembled visibly as he stood before the king, his eyes darting fearfully toward Lord Blackwood. Catherine could see that he was terrified, and she found herself silently willing him to have courage, to speak the truth despite his fear. "State your name," the king commanded. "Geoffrey Marsh, Your Majesty," the clerk said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I served in the Royal Archives 8 years ago, responsible for authenticating documents and maintaining records." "And what do you know of the documents used to convict Lord Edmund Ashworth?" Geoffrey swallowed hard, and Catherine saw sweat beading on his forehead. "Your Majesty, I was approached by Lord Blackwood several weeks before Lord Edmund's arrest. He asked me to certify certain documents as authentic, documents that purported to show Lord Edmund was plotting against the crown. He offered me a substantial sum of money to affix the royal seal to these documents without conducting the usual verification procedures." The murmuring in the hall grew louder at this revelation, and the king held up his hand for silence. "Are you saying you falsified official documents at Lord Blackwood's request?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Geoffrey said, his voice growing slightly stronger as he confessed. "I knew it was wrong, but Lord Blackwood threatened me and my family if I refused. He said he had powerful friends who could make us disappear if I did not cooperate. I was a coward, and I did as he asked, and I have lived with the guilt of it ever since. But I cannot remain silent any longer. Lord Edmund Ashworth was innocent. The documents that condemned him were forgeries, and I helped make them appear legitimate." Lord Blackwood's face had turned from pale to flushed with rage. "This is preposterous," he shouted. "This clerk is obviously being paid to lie, bribed by those who seek to undermine my rightful claim to Ashworth. Your Majesty, I implore you not to give credence to these fabricated testimonies. I acted in good faith based on evidence that was presented to me. If there was any irregularity in the documents, I was unaware of it." "Yet it is convenient, is it not?" Lady Beatrice interjected smoothly, "that the supposed evidence of Lord Edmund's treason has never been made available for independent examination. The documents were presented at the hearing, viewed by a select few, and then disappeared into Lord Blackwood's personal possession. If the evidence was legitimate, why not allow it to be studied by impartial scholars who could verify its authenticity?" The king's expression had grown increasingly stern as he listened to the testimony and arguments. He gestured to one of his advisors, a gray-haired man with shrewd eyes, and they conferred in low voices for several minutes. Catherine felt her heart hammering in her chest, knowing that everything hung in the balance of this moment. Finally, the king spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. "Lady Catherine, you claim to be the daughter of Lord Edmund Ashworth. What proof can you offer of your identity beyond the testimony of these witnesses?" Catherine stepped forward, her movements graceful despite her nervousness. "Your Majesty, I bear a ring that was commissioned by my father for my 10th name day. It is unique, known to anyone who was acquainted with my family. She held up her hand, the emerald catching the light and blazing with green fire. More than that, I carry memories that only the true Catherine Ashworth could possess. I remember the layout of Ashworth Castle, the tapestries in the great hall depicting the hunt of the White Hart, the rose garden my mother tended personally, the secret passage behind the library that my father showed me when I was 8 years old. I remember the faces of the servants, the names of my father's advisors, details of my childhood that no impostor could fabricate. She paused, then continued with growing passion. But more than any of this, Your Majesty, I remember my father as a man of honor and integrity, a man who served this crown faithfully for 20 years. He would never have betrayed his king or his country. The accusations against him were lies, fabricated by a man who wanted to steal what he could not earn through honest means. I stand before you today not merely to reclaim my inheritance, but to clear my father's name and restore honor to the Ashworth family. The king studied her intently, and Catherine met his gaze without flinching. She saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of recognition or perhaps remorse. "Come closer," he commanded, and Catherine approached the throne, her heart pounding. The king leaned forward, examining the ring on her finger with great care. "I remember this ring," he said quietly. "Lord Edmund showed it to me when he commissioned it, so proud of his daughter, so eager to give her something that would remind her always of her family's love." He looked up, meeting Catherine's eyes. "You have his eyes, the same shade of green, the same intelligence and fire, and you carry yourself with the bearing of one born to nobility, despite having lived in hiding for 8 years. He sat back on his throne, his expression grave. "I am inclined to believe you are who you claim to be, Lady Catherine, but the matter of whether your father was wrongfully convicted is more complex. It requires careful investigation and consideration." "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood interjected desperately, "surely you cannot give credence to this conspiracy theory based on the word of criminals and cowards. I have served you faithfully for 8 years, have I not? I have managed the Ashworth estates well, paid all taxes owed to the crown, maintained order and stability in the Northern Territories. Why would you overturn all of this based on such flimsy evidence?" "Because justice demands it," Adrian said, his voice ringing with conviction as he stepped forward to stand beside Catherine. "Your Majesty, I am Lord Adrian Devereux, and I knew Lord Edmund personally. He was my father's friend and a man of unimpeachable honor. I have investigated these matters thoroughly, and I am convinced beyond any doubt that he was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Blackwood. The testimony we have presented today is not flimsy, it is compelling and credible. And if Your Majesty values justice and the rule of law, you must acknowledge that a terrible wrong has been done, and take steps to remedy it." The king was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the decision before him. Catherine could see the political calculations playing out behind his eyes, the weighing of evidence against expedience, justice against stability. She held her breath, knowing that whatever he said next would determine not only her future, but the future of everyone who had helped her reach this moment. "Lord Blackwood," the king said finally, his tone cold and formal, "I am ordering a full investigation into the circumstances of Lord Edmund Ashworth's conviction and execution. All documents related to the case are to be surrendered to my investigators immediately, including any that are currently in your personal possession. You are to remain in the capital and make yourself available for questioning until this investigation is concluded. Any attempt to flee or to interfere with the investigation will be taken as evidence of guilt." Lord Blackwood's face contorted with rage and fear. "Your Majesty, this is an outrage. I am being punished for serving the crown faithfully, for exposing a traitor who threatened your very throne." "Silence," the king commanded, his voice sharp as a whip. "You will speak only when spoken to, Lord Blackwood. I have heard enough of your protests." He turned to Catherine. "Lady Catherine, until this investigation is complete and a final determination is made regarding your claim to the Ashworth estates, you will be given apartments here at court befitting your station. You and your companions are under my protection, and any who seek to harm you will answer to me personally." Catherine felt tears of relief streaming down her face. It was not complete victory, not yet, but it was far more than she had dared hope for. The king believed her. He was taking her claims seriously, and Lord Blackwood's power was beginning to crumble. Over the following weeks, The investigation proceeded with thorough efficiency. The king's investigators, led by a brilliant and incorruptible lawyer named Master Thomas Ashford, examined every detail of the case against Lord Edmund. They interviewed witnesses, studied documents, traced the flow of money and favors that had surrounded the original conviction. And with each passing day, the evidence of Lord Blackwood's conspiracy became more damning. Catherine remained at court during this time, living in the elegant apartments the king had provided and navigating the complex social world of the nobility. It was strange and often overwhelming after years of living as Anne Miller, but Lady Rowena and Lady Beatrice helped her adapt, teaching her the subtle arts of courtly behavior and helping her build relationships with influential nobles who might support her cause. Adrian remained by her side throughout, and their love deepened with each passing day. They spent hours walking in the palace gardens, talking about their hopes for the future, making plans for how they would rule their combined estates once Catherine's claim was secured. They spoke of the children they hoped to have, of the legacy they would build together, of the ways they would honor the memory of those who had been lost. One evening, as they sat together in Catherine's chambers with a chaperone discreetly positioned across the room, Adrian took her hand and spoke of matters he had been considering for some time. "When this is all over," he said quietly, "and you are restored to Ashworth, what will you do first?" Catherine considered the question carefully. "I will rebuild what was destroyed," she said finally. "Not just the physical damage to the castle and estates, though that will certainly be necessary, but the bonds of trust and loyalty that my father worked so hard to forge with his people. I want to be the kind of ruler he was, fair and just, caring for those under my protection as he did. And I want to clear his name completely, so that history remembers Lord Edmund Ashworth as the honorable man he was, not as the traitor Lord Blackwood painted him to be." "And will you allow me to help you in this work?" Adrian asked, his pale blue eyes warm with love and admiration. "As your husband and partner?" "I cannot imagine doing it without you," Catherine replied, squeezing his hand. "You have been my strength and my support through all of this. Whatever the future holds, I want to face it with you by my side." The investigation reached its conclusion on a warm spring morning 6 weeks after Catherine's initial appearance before the king. Master Thomas Ashford presented his findings in a formal session of the royal court, with all the major nobles and courtiers in attendance. Catherine sat in a place of honor, with Adrian on one side and Lady Rowena on the other, while Lord Blackwood stood in the center of the hall, his face a mask of barely controlled fury and fear. Master Ashford's report was exhaustive and devastating. He presented evidence of payments Lord Blackwood had made to Geoffrey Marsh and several other officials, payments that corresponded exactly to the dates when the forged documents had been created and certified. He revealed correspondence between Lord Blackwood and certain corrupt members of the previous King's Council, letters that clearly showed a conspiracy to remove Lord Edmund from his position and seize his estates. He even produced testimony from several of Lord Blackwood's own soldiers, men who had participated in the attack on Ashworth Castle and who, when offered immunity from prosecution, confirmed that their orders had been to kill everyone in the castle and make it appear as if they had died resisting lawful arrest. "The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable," Master Ashford concluded, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. "Lord Edmund Ashworth was innocent of all charges of treason. He was murdered, along with his wife and household, as part of a conspiracy orchestrated by Lord Blackwood for the sole purpose of stealing the Ashworth estates. This was not justice, Your Majesty. This was cold-blooded murder for profit, disguised as loyal service to the crown." The king's face was grave as he listened to the report, and when Master Ashford finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the revelations hanging heavily in the air. Finally he spoke, his voice filled with barely controlled anger. "Lord Blackwood, you stand accused of the gravest crimes imaginable. You have conspired to murder an innocent man and his family. You have fabricated evidence and corrupted royal officials. You have stolen lands and titles through deception and violence. You have made a mockery of justice and brought shame upon this court. What say you in your defense?" Lord Blackwood's composure finally cracked completely. "It should have been mine," he shouted, his voice raw with rage and desperation. "The Ashworth lands should have been granted to my family generations ago. Lord Edmund had no right to them, no right to the king's favor, no right to the wealth and power he enjoyed. I only took what should have been mine by rights. You had no rights to lands that belonged to another family, the king said coldly. You murdered an innocent man and destroyed his family to satisfy your own greed and ambition. You are a disgrace to your title and your name. He rose from his throne, and every person in the hall immediately fell silent, the gravity of the moment palpable. I hereby strip you of all titles, lands, and honors, the king pronounced, his voice ringing with royal authority. The Ashworth estates are restored to their rightful heir, Lady Catherine Ashworth, along with all incomes and properties that should have been hers these past 8 years. You are sentenced to be held in the Tower until such time as a formal trial can be convened to determine the full extent of your crimes and the appropriate punishment. Guards, take him away. Lord Blackwood struggled as the guards seized him, shouting curses and protestations, but he was overpowered and dragged from the hall. Catherine watched him go, feeling a complex mixture of triumph, relief, and sadness. Justice had been served, but it could not undo the terrible losses her family had suffered. Her parents were still dead. 8 years of her life had been stolen, and no amount of restitution could fully heal those wounds. But as Adrian took her hand and squeezed it gently, as Lady Rowena embraced her with tears of joy streaming down her face, as the nobles in the hall began to approach to offer their congratulations and pledge their support, Catherine felt something she had not experienced in 8 long years, hope for the future. The king descended from his throne and approached Catherine personally, a gesture of great honor that caused a ripple of surprise through the assembled courtiers. Lady Catherine, he said, his voice much gentler than it had been when addressing Lord Blackwood, I owe you and your family an apology that can never be adequate. Your father was a good and loyal servant of the crown, and he deserved far better than the fate that befell him. I should have investigated the charges more thoroughly before allowing his execution to proceed. That failure has haunted me these past 8 years, though I did not fully understand why until now. Catherine curtsied deeply, her heart swelling with emotion at the king's words. Your Majesty is gracious, she said. I know my father would be honored to hear you speak of him so kindly, and I am grateful beyond measure for the justice you have granted today. It is not merely justice, the king said. It is also an attempt, however inadequate, to right a terrible wrong. Your father's name will be formally cleared of all charges, and his service to the crown will be properly honored in the official records. Additionally, I am granting you a special dispensation to recover all revenues and incomes from the Ashworth estates for the 8 years they were wrongfully held by Lord Blackwood. It will not replace what you have lost, but it may help you rebuild what was destroyed. The generosity of this gesture left Catherine nearly speechless. The accumulated revenues from 8 years would be a substantial fortune, enough to restore Ashworth Castle to its former glory and ensure the prosperity of her people for years to come. Your Majesty is too kind, she managed to say. I will use these resources wisely and well, I promise you. I have no doubt of that, the king replied with a slight smile. You have your father's intelligence and your mother's grace. I expect great things from you, Lady Catherine. He glanced at Adrian, who had remained respectfully silent during this exchange. And I understand congratulations are in order regarding your betrothal to Lord Devereux. It is an excellent match, one that will strengthen both your houses. Thank you, Your Majesty, Catherine and Adrian said in unison, and the king's smile widened slightly at their synchronized response. In the days following the king's judgment, Catherine was overwhelmed with well-wishers and nobles seeking to curry favor with her now that her position was secure. She handled these social obligations with grace and patience, but what she truly longed for was to return to Ashworth, to see her ancestral home again and begin the work of restoration and healing. That opportunity came sooner than she had expected. 2 weeks after the judgment, the king granted her permission to leave court and return to Ashworth Castle. The journey north was undertaken with great ceremony, as befitted her restored status. Catherine traveled in a fine carriage with Lady Rowena and Lady Beatrice as companions, while Adrian rode alongside with Sir William and an honor guard of soldiers. As they drew closer to Ashworth, Catherine felt her emotions becoming increasingly turbulent. Excitement and trepidation mixed in equal measure. When the castle finally came into view, Catherine had to fight back tears. It looked exactly as she remembered it. The high stone walls, the 4 corner towers reaching toward the sky, the great gates that had once welcomed her home from rides through the countryside. Yet she knew that everything had changed. that the people who had made it a home were gone and could never return. The gates opened as they approached, and Catherine was surprised to see a large crowd gathered in the courtyard. Servants, guards, peasants from the surrounding villages, they had all come to witness the return of their rightful lady. As Catherine descended from the carriage, an elderly man stepped forward, tears streaming down his weathered face. She recognized him instantly as Thomas, her father's steward, a man she had thought must surely have been killed during Lord Blackwood's assault. "My lady," Thomas said, his voice breaking with emotion as he knelt before her. "We thought you dead these 8 years. To see you return, alive and well and restored to your rightful place, it is more than we dared hope for. Welcome home, Lady Catherine. Welcome home." Catherine helped him to his feet, embracing him warmly, despite the impropriety of such familiar contact with a servant. "Thomas, I am so glad you survived. I feared everyone I knew had been killed." "Many were," Thomas said sadly. "Lord Blackwood's purge was thorough, but some of us were deemed useful enough to keep alive, those whose knowledge of the estates made us valuable. We have waited and hoped for this day, for justice to finally be served." Over the following hours, Catherine toured the castle with Thomas, seeing both how much remained the same and how much had changed. The great hall still bore the same tapestries she remembered, though they were faded and in need of repair. The library where her father had taught her to read still contained many of his books, though Lord Blackwood had removed the most valuable volumes to his personal chambers. Her mother's rose garden had been neglected and had grown wild, but Catherine could see that with proper care it might be restored to its former beauty. When she finally entered her old chambers, the rooms where she had lived as a child and young woman, Catherine broke down completely, sobbing as memories flooded through her. Adrian, who had accompanied her throughout the tour, held her gently, letting her cry until the storm of emotion had passed. "I am sorry," she said when she could speak again, wiping at her tear-stained face. "I did not expect it to affect me so powerfully." "You have nothing to apologize for," Adrian assured her. "This is your home, the place where your family lived and loved. Of course it affects you deeply. Anyone would feel the same." That evening, Catherine held a gathering in the great hall, inviting all the servants who had served her family and survived Lord Blackwood's purge, as well as representatives from the villages on Ashworth lands. She spoke to them about her plans for the future, her commitment to ruling justly and fairly as her father had done, her determination to restore prosperity to the estates and ensure that those who worked the land were treated with dignity and respect. "I know these have been difficult years," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Lord Blackwood ruled with cruelty and extracted heavy taxes that impoverished many of you. That changes now. I am reducing all taxes to the levels my father maintained, and I am establishing a fund to help those families who suffered most under Lord Blackwood's rule. Additionally, I want to hear your concerns and your needs. My steward will be available to meet with anyone who wishes to speak about problems or suggest improvements to how the estates are managed." The response to her words was overwhelmingly positive, with many of those present openly weeping with relief and gratitude. Catherine realized that Lord Blackwood's harsh rule had created a deep hunger for the kind of benevolent leadership her father had provided, and she was determined not to disappoint those who were now looking to her with such hope. In the weeks that followed, Catherine threw herself into the work of restoration with tireless energy. She met with craftsmen to plan repairs to the castle, with farmers to discuss crop rotation and land management, with merchants to establish new trade relationships that would bring prosperity to the region. Adrian was constantly by her side, offering advice and support, and Catherine found herself increasingly grateful for his presence and partnership. 1 month after their return to Ashworth, Catherine made a journey that she had been both longing for and dreading. She traveled to the small village of Ravenmoor, to the humble cottage where she had lived as Anne Miller for 8 years. Ida was waiting for her, standing in the doorway of the cottage with tears streaming down her weathered face. "My child," Ida said as Catherine embraced her. "My dear, dear child. I have heard the news. Everyone has heard the news. Lady Catherine Ashworth, restored to her rightful place. I am so proud of you, so grateful that you achieved the justice you sought. I could not have done it without you," Catherine said, her own voice thick with emotion. "You protected me, sheltered me, taught me how to survive. You gave me the time I needed to heal and grow strong enough to face what had to be faced. I owe you everything, Ida. You owe me nothing, Ida said firmly. I did what any decent person would do when faced with a child in need. But I am glad, so very glad, that it turned out well in the end. Catherine had come prepared with an offer, and she made it now. Ida, I want you to come and live at Ashworth Castle. I want you to have a comfortable room, servants to attend to your needs, the best care and treatment that can be provided. You deserve to spend your remaining years in peace and comfort, not struggling to survive in this cottage. But Ida shook her head gently. That is very kind of you, child, but this cottage is my home. I have lived here for 40 years, and I wish to die here when my time comes. I am content with my simple life, and I would not be comfortable in a grand castle surrounded by servants and nobles. She smiled. But perhaps you might visit me from time to time and tell me of your life and your happiness. That would be gift enough for me. Catherine understood and respected Ida's choice, though it saddened her. She arranged for a generous pension to be paid to Ida regularly, enough to ensure the old woman would never want for anything, and she promised to visit often. True to her word, she made the journey to Ravenmoor several times over the following months, always bringing news and spending hours talking with the woman who had saved her life. As summer gave way to autumn, preparations began for Catherine's wedding to Adrian. It was to be a grand affair, befitting the union of two noble houses, held in the great hall of Ashworth Castle with nobles from throughout the realm in attendance. The king himself had promised to attend, a great honor that reflected the esteem in which he now held Catherine and her family. The night before the wedding, Catherine stood in her chambers, looking out over the Ashworth lands bathed in moonlight. Lady Rowena and Lady Beatrice were with her, helping her prepare for the momentous day ahead. The wedding dress that had been made for her was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, created of ivory silk with an overdress of burgundy velvet embroidered with gold thread and patterns of oak leaves and acorns, the symbols of her family. "Are you nervous?" Lady Beatrice asked, noticing Catherine's thoughtful expression. "A little," Catherine admitted. "Not about marrying Adrian. I have no doubts about that. But about everything it represents, the future we are stepping into together, the responsibilities we will bear. Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is real, that I am truly home, that justice has been served, that I am about to marry a man I love deeply. It is real," Lady Rowena said gently, coming to stand beside Catherine at the window. "You have achieved something extraordinary, Catherine. You survived when you should have died. You persevered when most would have given up. You fought for justice and won against impossible odds. And tomorrow you will marry a good man who loves you dearly and will stand beside you in all the challenges to come. You have every reason to be proud and happy." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that seemed like a blessing from heaven itself. The great hall had been transformed into a vision of beauty, with flowers and silk banners hanging from the walls, candles providing warm golden light, and the finest foods and wines laid out for the feast that would follow the ceremony. Catherine walked down the aisle on the arm of Sir William, who had agreed to give her away in the absence of her father. She wore her mother's ring on one hand, and a new ring that Adrian had given her on the other, a beautiful band of gold, set with diamonds that caught the light and sparkled like stars. Her copper hair was arranged in elaborate braids woven with pearls, and a delicate veil of white lace covered her face. At the end of the aisle, Adrian waited for her, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. He wore black and silver, the colors of his house, with a cloak of midnight blue lined with ermine. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile of such pure joy and love that Catherine felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ceremony was conducted by a bishop specially sent by the king, and his words about love, loyalty, and partnership resonated deeply with Catherine. When the time came to exchange vows, she spoke hers clearly and firmly, promising to love Adrian, to honor him, to stand beside him in all circumstances for as long as they both should live. Adrian's vows were equally heartfelt, his voice strong and certain as he pledged himself to her completely. When the bishop finally pronounced them husband and wife and Adrian lifted her veil to kiss her, Catherine felt as if everything in her life had led to this perfect moment. The applause and cheers that filled the great hall seemed to come from very far away, muffled by the intensity of her focus on Adrian, on the feel of his lips on hers, on the rightness of being in his arms. The feast that followed was magnificent, with music and dancing and celebration that lasted long into the night. The king himself raised a toast to the bride and groom, speaking eloquently about justice, perseverance, and the triumph of good over evil. Noble after noble came forward to offer their congratulations and pledge their friendship to the newly united houses of Ashworth and Devereux. But the moment Catherine treasured most came later in the evening, when she and Adrian slipped away from the festivities for a few moments of privacy. They stood together on the battlements of Ashworth Castle, looking out over the lands that were now theirs to protect and nurture, and Adrian took both her hands in his. "Are you happy?" he asked softly, his pale blue eyes searching her face in the torchlight. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Catherine replied honestly. 8 years ago, I lost everything I loved. I thought I would spend the rest of my life in hiding, always looking over my shoulder, always grieving for what could never be recovered. But instead, I found you. I found justice. I found my way home. And now I have a future filled with hope and possibility. She squeezed his hands. "Yes, Adrian, I am happy. More happy than I have words to express." "Then my life has purpose and meaning," Adrian said, pulling her close and resting his forehead against hers. "Everything I have done, everything I am, I dedicate to ensuring your happiness continues. I love you, Catherine Devereux, now and forever." "And I love you," Catherine whispered, kissing him tenderly, "now and forever." As they stood together under the stars, Catherine thought of all those who had helped her reach this moment. Her parents, whose love had given her the strength to survive. Ida, who had sheltered her and kept her safe. Sir William, who had risked everything to save her life. Lady Rowena and Lady Beatrice, who had believed in her cause and helped her fight for justice. And Adrian, her beloved husband, who had stood beside her through everything and would continue to stand beside her in all the years to come. The past could not be changed, and the losses she had suffered would always carry weight in her heart. But the future stretched before her, bright with promise and filled with love. She had reclaimed her name, her home, her rightful place in the world. She had found love and justice and hope, and she would spend the rest of her life honoring the memory of those she had lost by living fully and well, by ruling wisely and justly, by building a legacy that would make her parents proud. Lady Catherine Ashworth had lived hidden under another name for 8 long years, but when she forgave the past and found the courage to step into the light, she was recognized by the world not just for who she had been, but for who she had become, a woman of strength, courage, and unwavering integrity, a woman who had fought for justice and won, a woman who had found true love in the most unexpected of circumstances, a woman who would be remembered not as a victim of tragedy, but as a symbol of hope and resilience for generations to come. And as Catherine stood in her husband's embrace, looking out over her restored kingdom with the stars shining brightly overhead, she knew that her story, which had begun in darkness and despair, had found its way to the happiest of endings.